Trial of the Unknown Tape by Smite. Pre-Forewords Foreword. Without noticing, this book ended up with 3, now 4, foreword type things. Such are the consequences of drunkenly undertaking literary projects. They all serve a purpose, and it's pretty funny to have this many of them, so I'm not changing it. Disclaimer. This is a long-ass book that consists of talking about all this music gonzo style. I heavily encourage listening to all the albums I mentioned before reading the respective chapters. Altogether, there are a bit more than 4 hours of good music, so if you have the time to read this book, you probably also have the time to listen to the albums. And if you don't want to listen to them before hearing about them, I hope I can at least change your mind. Foreword. I'm currently sitting here, drinking my 4th Cuba Libre of the day, wearing my first Loser of Fine Purpose November shirt, and writing my book. It's not complete yet, but I feel like it should have a foreword, not to describe what the book is about, but rather just to give a basic overview of what kind of person I am. It's not a book that objectively tries to capture the essence of trial. It's just a book that I wanted to write because of how artistically into it I am. Everything in this book serves 3 purposes. First, it's an analysis of every album that I consider significant in the Trial of the Golden Witch discography. It's also an analysis of the story and character represented in Trial of the Golden Witch. And finally, the book is also a story about me and why all of this music matters so much to me. When it comes to the process of how the book was written, it's fairly simple. I just pulled all the analysis out of my ass. Digi has made videos analyzing most of her albums, and I plan to incorporate them into the book. But over time, I just wanted to get the book actually finished, so I'm not going to do that. Once the book is done, I hope to look at those videos and understand how Digi herself thinks of her own albums, but as it stands, my interpretation is mostly just derived from the art itself. This book is not really written for anyone other than myself, so I don't feel the need to have the most accurate interpretation. In a sense, it's one of the most artistic things anyone could possibly do. I have created a work where my personality has been inserted into and interlaced with the music of Trial. There is no comfortable distance between me and Trial. There is no separation between anything that I'm going to go through. It's all going to be me trying to sell you on the raw emotions that I got from the music. So here's what you need to know about me. I'm not a music analyst, but I consider myself to be a pretty big fan of music, insofar as I've listened to a bunch of the most wanted music. I don't really stick to genre, so I don't have the most in-depth knowledge of hip-hop or rap, but I've listened to plenty of it. I've mostly lived the past 4 years online, since I'm an autistic NEET, and when I have done anything in real life, it's been facilitated by digital networks. I don't care much about anime, nor do I care about Digi as an analyst. Someone else could analyze how her music relates to her thoughts on anime, but that's not for me. I connect to her as a person to a certain extent, but mostly she serves a figure that I can look to when I need someone who can think the same way I can. I haven't been around to see any of these albums I'm talking about get released, so my involvement has been relatively minimal until now. I'm just writing this book because I can't go another day without doing that. What are my qualifications? Only that I write a lot. Does this book have any real purpose to exist other than I simply want it to? Not really. Should you read it? If you want to. Just keep in mind that it's just a very prolonged drunken rant, and you get exactly what you paid for. Preamble. At the start of 2019, I started watching Digi. I don't know what whim of the Google gods caused it, but I ended up in the rabbit hole of After Dark rants. I had seen some of her videos before when I was just looking for generic anime content to throw on in the background, but I had never seen videos like this. She was watching every new anime, ranting about everything under the sun, all to the backdrop of an extensive personal lore. This was a true human content machine. Since my entry point was After Dark, getting moderately acquainted with the deep lore wasn't really a hard thing to do. I heard whispers of a gaming channel in the music career. There was supposedly even a podcast with some other guys or something. But as a deep lore novice, I wasn't even paying that much attention to any of it. The name Trial of the Golden Witch was too long to remember in full, so I never ended up googling it. Then came the big tier list craze. One of those was a video going over the entire Trial of the Golden Witch discography. Immediately I was greeted by a wall of albums and given the perspective of the 2 people most familiar with them. I was intrigued. So whenever an album sounded interesting and got high praise, I gave it a quick listen. What I ended up hearing were Bedrock, emotional anime raps, Gay and Dead, and the Unknown Tape. Bedrock and Gay and Dead were both fun, and I ended up returning to them a few times in the next months. But the Unknown Tape was dense, and I couldn't make out any words being said on it. The chaos, the drone, the sheer insanity of the project was just too much for me to handle. And I was in no way new to experimental music. Over the past few years, I had already become fairly acquainted with all forms of it. I can listen to whatever industrial noise band that didn't even try to sound like music and enjoy it, but none of that could even compare to the sheer sonic density of the Unknown tape. And yet the album retained a huge degree of mystery. The icons as a representative of the song names, the cryptic lyrics, and the looming statement that it was a highly personal, emotional album. It was a mystery I was not yet ready to decrypt. And so it went until September. I gave some of the albums a few more listens in the interim, but didn't really experience anything significant. I was somewhat in the bedrock of my own bedroom once again, so that album immediately became the one I would return to when I was going to fall down the rabbit hole in just a few short days after December started. And then came the final step. I joined the Digi Discord and got sent an old episode of the PCP. I heard Digi and Jess sing on it. My first impulse after that was just, hey, didn't these two guys make some albums together? I think I want to listen to those now. Bedrock. And then it clicked. Everything fell into place. I put on Bedrock again, and some part of it activated a primal switch in my brain that had not been touched since I was 7. The greatest connecting power of them all hit me like a torrent. Pure autism was flowing through my veins. The harsh yet melodic beats, the rhymes that were equal parts highly personal and viable cringe. This album gave me the sheer raw experience of listening to three guys just stumbling through music. Now, I wasn't really that in tune with how long Trial of the Golden Witch had existed for. I didn't know about the music Endless Jess had already made. The only person who would have ordinarily been stumbling at that point in her career was Shade, but his production was the most polished part of the album. Over time, I would come to realize that there was no stumbling involved, it was just music. Even though it's easy to ascribe the roughness to the album being an amateur production, that wasn't why the album was rough. You can't make polished music if the people making it only have rough edges. It is only appropriate that an album about being stuck in a bedroom, even after leaving Bedrock and finding success, would inherently be somewhat rough. It's an album about being confused while living a confusing life. If it were any more polished, it would lose a huge part of that appeal. And sure, compared to the discography after Bedrock, it was far more amateur and had less aspirations of contributing to a career. The upcoming projects that were treated with more care would all display a massive degree of improvement from all fronts. In just a year, Digi would be rapping with the best of them on Gay and Dead. But this was the intersection of two narratives. From the standpoint of the music career, Bedrock stood in front of a long history of incredibly amateur outsider art, but it was not yet a part of the upcoming canon of some top-tier underground shit. As someone who can only really enjoy most of the pre-Bedrock part of Trial of the Golden Witch as an archivist, the project for me really only began in 2016. Bedrock shows me the cracks of the rich history of Trial of the Golden Witch. It falls between two worlds, one of which I'm fully immersed in, the other one I mostly hear about when Digi chooses to sing about it. I've listened to those albums, but I don't connect with most of them in the same way at all. There are some exceptions though. Hearing Open 2014 came as a shock to me. It was open but without being open 2017, the same track but from a different time. 3 years apart from the song, I had already heard 50 times by the time I finally came around to the original. But I was still the same person, the same melody. Just 3 years before Open 2017. As someone who is constitutionally incapable of really maintaining stable friendships, the open wavelength is the same I've been on for a long time. But the bitterness of everything that has been left long behind. Friends that will be friends forever, but who we barely stay in touch with. My entire lifetime has been coloured by dealing with leaving others behind once I manage to sufficiently alienate them and burn through the relationship. So even though I haven't been forced to constantly move from place to place, I have never maintained to sustain anything either. And returning to Open 2017, nothing has really changed. The only real difference is the realization that the alienation can't be blamed on anyone else. Digi can now accept that a certain degree of solitude is inherent in her existence. She will hurt others, she will leave them behind, but they will still be with her forever. And that's the same way I have felt for the longest time, and that's the same thing that has been reinforced over and over again. And coming back to the narrative where this might not be true for the first time in forever, working through the upcoming discography is a hopeful sentiment. When even the person who declares that she will hurt her friends can get to the manic high, maybe I can too. And maybe things might not be perfect forever, but maybe I will also be able to connect at some point. Now that this strand of logic is concluded, I have to return to Bedrock to conclude my thoughts on that album. As much as I would like for this piece to be polished too, my feelings on Trial of the Golden Witch aren't polished. Even as I'm writing this, I cannot keep my composure. The emotional impact that the music has had on me has made me more able to appreciate music in general. I have always been let down by how music is not that dense in meaning. Even the songs that are best known for their cryptic nature and deep layers of symbolism have left me feeling empty. But then here's Trial of the Golden Witch, a project where every song has exactly as much meaning as I expect the average song to have. A project that can seemingly engage me forever, and a project that by sheer stroke of fortune was created by a person who struggles with the same things I do. So here comes the first track of Bedrock, a song about the complete isolation people like me have been facing ever since it was truly possible to be isolated. Laced with references to anime, a true anthem of the basement-dwelling outsider, but not beyond parody. There's no implication that living the Bedrock life is noble or significant, just that it exists. A song about self-reflection that just by sheer accident managed to capture the experiences of a whole group of people. A collection of bad habits to the tune of a nice beat. But it isn't without any hope. The solitude has been harnessed and driven in such a way that can inspire success. It might be about an outsider whose entire life is one bad habit, but those bad habits can lead to success in the world at large. Even a person who can orient her life around things that normal society considers meaningless distractions can leverage their experiences to get something out of the world. And this theme continues with Rotten. It's not just that there are two people stuck in their bedrooms staying up all night, but the bedrooms are grimy and full of trash. Both people on the song are completely falling apart. The first song was only an introduction to Bedrock, a taste of how bad it could possibly get. It's not as if being trapped in a bedroom is inherently bad. It's a bedroom they're stuck in that makes it all the more worse. And I've been there, in a room where the blinds are never open, unless absolutely necessary. Constant food waste lying around everywhere because I'm not going to bother cleaning up after I cook. Being stuck in freezing temperatures just because I can't be bothered to take care of my own apartment. Clothes scattered across the floor because I can never clean up after myself. Trapped in a prison of my own design. So from my experience, I connect with this song as one about the state of making yourself rotten. It's not a song about losing control, but rather a song about being perfectly in control and just making everything worse. The tragedy lies in the fact that there's a choice everywhere, but all choices are bad for people like us. But this isn't the end of Bedrock. This album instantly pivots into accepting some parts of other people with humans are okay. And this is why Digi is one of the best album artists there is. Her sheer talent at being able to arrange songs in the perfect order is unrivaled. Sure, another person might have put failure after Rotten. It only makes sense, right? It continues the theme. But no one wants to hear failure after listening to Rotten. Because if you have ever been rotten yourself, now's exactly the time that you want to hear that humans are okay. But it's not like the next track embraces humanity in any meaningful way. It's not as if Digi herself became any more social, but rather that she can begrudgingly accept that her antisocial lifestyle is dependent on others. Sure, she has her own shit to take care of, but she needs art and she needs food. Sure, Digi just wants to see more high-concept outsider art that most people can't appreciate or produce, but she can't be placated. Just a bit of gross food and baseline acceptance is enough to bring her into reality. For me, the song is also defined by the tinge of bitterness over having to live a life that lacks both conformity and principles. Not being hardcore enough to be exclusively underground and off the grid, but feeling the impulse strongly enough that everything normal becomes entirely alienated. But you can't have IHOP off the grid. An existence forever tied to the comforts provided by an uncomfortable society. The next song, Actualize, keeps going and goes hard in the same themes the entire album has been building up to. It's not that Digi can't criticize herself, but the problem is how others criticize her. All that she wants is a more empathetic world where people can properly share their experiences, and the inherent frustration in this song is because of the impossibility of that ever happening. But she doesn't inherently need to be respected or accepted by anyone. She chooses how much she alienates herself and realizes that she's nowhere close to even being a good person. But that doesn't give other people the right to latch on to something pointless that they themselves think if ever considering how she might feel about her own life and what her goals might be. White Nigga is a bit of a pointless song. It serves as a conclusion to not caring about society, and does fairly well as a bridge between the first and second parts of the album. It doesn't really mean anything to me. It's just a song about being able to say nigga while still respecting the culture that popularized the word. Okay, future me here. The rest of all this was written months ago, but now we have the RE-MXTP out, so the entire thing I wrote about digital intent with Get Action became completely pointless. I've listened to both versions of it, the original and the new one. Both are really good in different ways, even though the first one doesn't sound like she wanted it to sound and is completely unrefined compared to the new one. I still don't think she missed the intent with the first version by making it too slow. It just wasn't executed with the same impact she wanted it to have. So the new one feels much faster and choppier, but the original has a certain sense of calm derision that the new one lacks. But it's a case where Digi had to develop the skills to be able to execute what you originally wanted to, but still succeeded in making something good the first time. Get Action is my favourite song off the album, and it's not even close. The song is aimed at me, a lazy fuck who sits on their ass all day instead of making art, burning with a passion for creativity that could never really come out in the way I intended to. And all my heroes are dropouts, and I did drop out, but now I'm still a fake fuck who probably has to go back to school because I can't get action. But at least I tried. At least I devoted as much of myself as I could to trying to devote my life to the art I know I need to create. But I'm working towards it. Listening to Get Action is motivating and self-deprecating at the same time. I want to live up to Jessie and Digi. And I know if I put the work in, I can make a nice niche for myself and live in that corner forever, but I make excuses and I can't do shit as fast as I should. Even so, I've spent my whole life thus far trying to get that action, and hearing my choices validated motivates me to keep on trying. I've been in the same mindset for as long as I've been alive, and even though I don't live up to the best, I'm going to keep trying for as long as I can. But at least I'm not fake in the sense that I act like I'm a real artist. I'm not one, and I might be one someday, but not now. They can't run back to normalcy, and they can't put in the work. I've never been normal, and I've always been fickle. So now that as long as I don't get that action, I might not be able to live my life in the way that I want to. But ultimately, what's better? Having the chance to be a part-time artist while actually advancing my life, or being a full-time nobody, too depressed and isolated to make anything? I don't need help, and I don't need a circle jerk. All I need is to get my shit together and find out the way to harness everything inside and manage to bring it out in some measure. Because there is a lot there and a lot in me, and I can accomplish it, and I can grab the opportunities as they come. But I tried devoting myself to art for 4 years. All I did in that time was write some shitty books and jerk off. Now's probably the time for something different. But even if I go through my life trying to get educated and hoping for a potential career in a field that is thick enough for me to enjoy, Get Action will echo through me as I know I will return to getting that fucking action just in my own time. And just a year later, the issue released for Stella the Magic, a much more nuanced and tame take on these themes that embodies everything I am in the world as it is, not just the main that I want to find myself in. I'm Mortal is the first song in a long series of Digi's reflections on having a limited lifespan. This is a long journey through multiple songs, but the starting point we're given is a solemn reflection on all the time that has been wasted and all the potential that will never be as long as mortality exists. Digi can distract herself from her own mortality, but she can't accept it. She just hopes that we can solve death with technology, but given that she has no control over that process, she has to keep living her life the best she can. Wasting time might be the worst way to spend the limited life that she has, but she can't do anything else with the knowledge that she's going to die. She has a struggle to live within the confines of biology. For me, this is a very mature take on life, which is pretty obvious to basically everyone. And sure, it would be nice to be able to see the conclusion of the human story, but we have only had 6,000 years of civilization, a small enough time span that we can still see some of the oldest structures ever built, and that it's possible to learn history at all. We have records dating back to all time periods. The human story itself is very young and immature. We're all cosmic children, just playing around with civilization as we wish. It feels like yesterday that we decided to come out of the caves and start building something. And obviously, we have failed pretty miserably, and it would be cool to see where it goes. Having the ability to see if humanity can ever truly grow up would be the greatest chance anyone could wish for. But at the same time, all of our places are within the continuity of human history. It's not that we have to live forever, we just have to make sure that we do our part to make the world a better place. And then maybe someone many thousands of years from now can forget everyone involved in the millennia of childishness our species went through. Or maybe the people who made the world better might be remembered as the first steps to some sort of larger maturity, where empathy, reason, and acceptance can rule the world. Where instead of solving problems by coming up with more and more chance, actual conversations can take place. And when instead of breaking shit to get what we want, we can actually solve problems by creating things. So how about that Failure will make it look cool? I think it's a good song overall. It's musically definitely the most engaging one in the album for me. While Rotter is one of the best tone pieces ever, and Get Action is somewhat of a personal anthem for me, Failure is just a pleasure to listen to. The beat it's set to might be one of my favourite beats of all time. Most things are better when they're more complex, but capturing something with true simplicity is a rare pleasure. The melody is pleasant, and the lyrics just complement it. Although when it comes to the meaning of the song, I feel like it's relatively samey and mostly reinforces the themes of the album. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, it adds to the message. It's hard to live in a society where no one understands you, and it's hard to understand people when they live so differently from what you want people to be like, and the only way to survive is to live up to what you yourself want to be. The track also epitomizes the central conflict of the album, being caught between greatness and self-loathing. Gigi's rotten, doesn't live up to her own standards, but she can also accept herself and see the greatness that she could arise to. It's a conflicted message coming from a conflicted person, but it's a conflict a lot of people have faced. The internet as a paradigm shift has created a culture caught between narcissism and depression. Everyone stuck in this culture experiences a bit of both. Every permutation of this connects deeply to the undercurrents of her time and place in the world. Final Stretch is the final stretch of the album and concludes the main theme, getting out of the bedroom and up from the bedrock. Even though Digi is temporarily in a manic, ascended state, it's a temporary thing. But there's always the possibility that the manic dreams can create something greater that can last. Everything is accelerating hard enough that now life feels like it can really start. Instead of being stuck in a confusing world, Digi has become unstuck. She can now begin creating her own world. The feelings of greatness have won out, and she is now great according to others, and no one can even start implying otherwise. She doesn't have to dream anymore. She can lead the change she wants to see. The concept of becoming as great as someone else has faded. The only thing to get higher than is where she was before. For me, this is a true conclusion of the narrative of the album. It took a bit of a diversion in White Nigga, but everything has linearly led up the final stretch. So even though Digi can describe the song as a mess, it's a beautiful conclusion to the album. It literally is an experience of rising up, getting yourself in a space where you can now start living. And even though Digi claims that this entire album is about being in that state, I don't think that does justice to the way the album is arranged. It starts with the bedrock, leads to songs where Digi leaves the bedroom, goes into the philosophy of what kind of artist she wants to be and how she sees humanity, and finally leads to her making her own life the way she wants it to be. And after that journey has concluded, it pays off. She reaches the final stretch. Everything she has been doing has been worth it. She can now truly dream of being able to live how she wants to live. She is living up to what she could be, and is no longer stuck in the bedroom bedrock. She has actualized, made the art that she wants to make, and is getting all the action she could get. But this album would be unfinished if it didn't communicate that the narrative is open-ended. So Waves at Dawn comes in to deliver the final blow. It's an echo of the bedrock in the bedroom, even though Digi has risen up from it. But now she's in the middle of an ocean of things she doesn't know, and things she isn't quite ready to deal with. The chaos of final stretch obscured how she isn't quite ready yet, and now she calls back to when she was still in her bedroom. She's gotten up from the bedrock, but it's not like anything has fundamentally changed. She can pursue her art and succeed at it, but she's still the same person, and now we're left wondering where the story will go. Intermission. Because I didn't listen to the album's chronological sequence, I'm now torn between telling the story of Digi in a linear way or telling the story of my involvement with the music. Bedrock Bedrock was the starting point for both of us in this sense, but the stories fork. I started listening in an erratic order, discovering albums, listening to them over and over again, buying them at random times when I had heard them enough time to know that I liked them. I can now talk about Gay and Dead, since that's the next album I dove into. But the themes of Bedrock would still be left open, and in reality, going in chronological order here makes more sense. I didn't really have that much personal involvement in above their haunted or emotional anime raps. Even though I love both of those albums, it's not really as if they fit into any personal narrative for me. So I guess it only makes sense to continue the story of Digi before continuing my story. Above the Earth, Haunted. Above the Earth is a follow-up to Bedrock that deals with the emptiness that can arise even after rising up from hitting bedrock. When Bedrock ended with a large question mark in the form of Waves at Dawn, Above the Earth is a tragic conclusion to the narrative. Even though it doesn't change the uplifting progression of Bedrock, it creates an inherently new and more complete story in a completely different context. Even though Digi succeeded at her goals that were laid out in Bedrock, it wasn't that she could be saved just by obtaining wealth and freedom. So despite being above the earth with her newfound success, she remains haunted by her own inner demons. Fittingly, the album opens up with almost nothing. In this song, Digi is a character that embodies the paradigm of rationalistic vitality, a being of passionate reason, seen as a madman by everyone around her. She might not have emotions like most people, and she might not be able to use the same methods to find solidity that everyone around her can, but from her perspective, It's just a reaction to reason. It's not that she herself is wrong, but rather just strange as compared to a world that is inherently insane. My song contrasts the insanity of the world to the depressive nature of a rational existence. If there is no rational proof of God, death must be final, and for Digi this is still a very hard thing to accept. She can't relate to others, but she still feels a longing to be a part of something. But if she conformed, she would lose herself and lose her passion. Her reasoned approach to life has gotten her as far as she is. She strongly believes that her life is under her control, echoing the sentiment in Bedrock. But it's not like her life is perfect or full of meaning. The world is still insane, and Digi could very well be the most insane one of them all, for thinking things could make sense. Her attempt to control her existence created a nightmare, but one she is fulfilled by. In Sieve, this gets even more externalized. Digi speaks about how she can't deal with having to deal with other people. She doesn't necessarily find herself as being above them, but rather finds everyone to be less rational than her, continuing the trend introduced in Almost Nothing. Digi is burning with a powerful passion. Sure, she can't be happy constantly, but at least she can be herself and doesn't have to conform to the expectations of everyone else. This accelerates the themes of a very contradicted depression. In one part, she's alive, she's herself, she doesn't conform, but stated in Almost Nothing, her happiness is contingent upon being satisfied enough with the world that she doesn't have to be seething. On one hand, Digi just wants the world to be pathetic and wants things to make sense, but then upon being denied basic humanity, she resorts to detaching herself. Not out of any sense of genuinely wanting to be detached from the world, but because the world is completely incapable of giving her what she needs from it. So she seethes at the world, she's mad at everybody. It's not as if she can be accepted by them, it's not like she can accept them either. She's a true stranger to the world, but that's the only way she can live. No one has the fortitude to keep up with her, so she can't keep up with anyone else either. But she would do anything to find someone that can bear the full force of her personality, but realizes that it's a lot to bear. Shallow is a more internal song. Dealing with her isolation is in large part her own fault. She isn't a good guy, and she can't find value in the more meaningful and real parts of living. She has a harsh personality that is inherently filthy, and it's her own fault that she can't make herself even borderline presentable to the rest of the world. To me, it seems like the song is ultimately about Digi embracing her isolation to cope with it. It's not as if she couldn't change if she wanted to, but she could just embrace who she is and just wait for the world to adjust to her. It's not that she necessarily has to change as long as she's honest about what she is, and if she can only be who she is, then there is no other choice than to accept it. Even despite living up to everything she has to live up to, it goes unappreciated by the world. She wants to be deeply understood, but is also not willing to deeply understand people. So even while she is still adjusting to better herself and live even more according to what she herself thinks she should be, she has given up trying to live in a way that would impress people. Any abstract ideals get completely subsumed by the mundanity of her strangeness. Digi has created her own normality and managed to adjust to the world. Deadline functions as a sequel to Waves at Dawn. Even though she has risen even further than she was at the end of Bedrock, it's still a temporary retreat from the world. Her success still feels temporary. Nothing has changed deeply, but she's above the earth. She's neither in her bedrock nor integrated into society. But this time the temporary nature of her situation isn't a matter of questioning, but rather of certainty. She can prolong her current state for some time, but she just doesn't know for how long. The final song also captures everything about the theme of the album. The world has inherent problems that they can't be fixed by a single person. Even after finding success, there's no guarantee that personal problems will disappear. Even if Digi has managed to live up to her own standards for the most part, she's thrust into the world where she doesn't have a place and can only temporarily live above the earth. For me, Above the Earth is probably the least emotionally impactful project from Trial of the Golden Witch. Although I do enjoy Almost Nothing and Sieve quite a lot, Shallow and Deadline don't really have that much appeal to me. Usually it feels like the 12-minute runtime of the album is 2 minutes too long, but it's not like I can't appreciate it. Since this is a Trial of the Golden Witch album, it's still some of the most impactful music I have ever heard, and it's definitely one of the better albums to just throw on in the background. Even within these 12 minutes, I can connect with Digi. I have lived the same sort of lifestyle. I have followed her journey in Bedrock, and even when I found what I considered to be my success, to send it beyond my own Bedrock, I realized too that even that would not be a solution to all of my problems. But my own success was nowhere near as significant or far-reaching. The emotions I felt were nowhere in the same degree that she must have felt. But if I had heard the albums when they came out, I might have been completely unable to connect. I didn't really have my own bedroom to hit Bedrock in when it was 2016, and I only rose above the earth in 2018. I have already gone through the journey. Maybe if I had heard these albums earlier, I would have not even hit Bedrock in 2017. Maybe I would have paid more attention to sustaining my position above the roof in 2018. Maybe everything would not have collapsed again in 2019. And although the journey of Digi does not end up being a tragedy, the setbacks only began mounting up in the immediate future after Above the Roof. A relative lull began in personal albums. It would be another year before we would have another album that dealt with the journey that Digi had undergone. So for me personally, hope is that I will keep following the same timescale, and that 2020 will be my Manic High Manic Low year, and I will get my own Coast of Midwinter boulders moment. If someone who has gone through similar things to me could recover after falling from her tower above the roof, maybe I can do that too. So it's not like the album can literally change my life, but I have a strong connection to the story. Despite it being the journey of Digi, it's also in some part my own journey as a similar person. But we should talk about the music itself some too. Both the production and delivery get drastic improvements in this album. The really rough edges of Pedro and Bedrock are gone, and a new era is beginning where the music is actually well developed and the creative vision of Trial of the Golden Witch gets more realized. Thankfully, a lot of the charm is maintained in later albums that deliberately introduce friction in the lyrics and production to retain the sense that the music is not supposed to be acceptable. In a sense, it's even more organic going forwards, as accidentally being unacceptable is replaced with being deliberately unacceptable, which perfectly coincides with the main message and themes of the music. But after the first act of Digi's life story has concluded, Trial released emotional anime raps. My problem with this album is that I don't really connect with emotions in it. Not because I don't really feel the same way, but rather because it's so close to what my default feelings are that I don't get that much out of it. For me, it evolves into background noise due to being inherently relatable. Emotional anime raps was one of the first Trial projects I ever heard. This was because May is a huge fan of the album, so she recommended it pretty highly in the Trial tier list video. And since these were the first ones I heard, they were also the ones I went immediately back to when I started getting really into Trial of the Golden Witch. In this pass, emotional anime rap stood out as the least interesting, but I loved both Pedro and Bedrock and Kente much more than when I first heard them. Those two albums really spoke to me in a way that emotional anime raps just didn't. The Unknown tape was still incredibly interesting, but something inside of me really rejected it. I still couldn't make out the words, and the production was still incredibly unfriendly. So when it comes to Trial, a huge part of why the project appeals to me so much is that it's the same way I would make music. I would want to use experimental beats, cool flows, and write the densest lyrics I could possibly come up with. But there comes a point where something is so obvious to me that I can't appreciate it as much as I would otherwise. This is why Emotional Anime Raps 2 is so much more impactful to me than Emotional Anime Raps. The sequel can actually make me feel a lot of feelings. While the first one really focuses on baseline emotions, the second one goes deep into some of the more real existential sadness. And the only reason why Open 2017 has such a huge impact on me is because I heard Open 2014. If that had never happened, I wouldn't even think about the song. And I guess this is the crux of my issue. Nothing about this album makes me reflect. It's not like it doesn't invoke any emotions, but it rather just invokes the emotions I'm already feeling constantly. Maybe someone else who has a completely different landscape of feelings might enjoy this album far more. Or maybe someone who feels comfort at the fact that someone else is feeling the same things. But for me, this just isn't as meaningful as it could be. With all that being said, I still love the album. Given that it's a Trial album, I have heard all of these songs countless times and connected with them every time. So while my first listen might not have been impactful, the album still has had a large impact. I've already talked about how I feel about For Stella the Magic. It's a song about always moving forward and never stopping making art. It's a song about embracing all of your past, because that's the only way to move forward. The song is about Digi believing in anyone who has ever made cool art and wanting them to keep doing it. In a way, the song is almost too personal to analyze, as I have to analyze myself to understand the song. It feels like I'm dissecting something that has grown into inherently being a part of me. But given that this entire book is a drunken rant diving into my deepest feelings, the least I can do is give everyone one of the more personal parts of this story. The crux of the matter is, if you stop moving forward, you basically aren't even alive anymore. The only way to possibly survive is to keep going forward, never slowing down, and always working on making something better. We're all stuck in a world that doesn't care for us and wants to kill us or change us. There's no end point. It's just a process of constantly avoiding destructive influences. You can either conform yourself to the expectations of others or live authentically. And it's not like staying yourself will ever be easy or the world will ever accept us. It's not like we can live as ourselves without having to struggle. There's some value in hardships, and even though we have to live through a degree of rejection that no person should be asked to tolerate, that was what made us who we are. We should change the world so no one else ever has to live like this, but we do not need to resent it for making us into the people who we are. Dear Future just continues on these themes, except it's oriented around seizing the future. It's not just about growing, but also making sure that everyone else can do the same. We all share the same world, so the only way we can live better is if other people live better. Still, the song is fundamental about not abandoning who you are in the face of adversity and not giving your future up. The sense of rationality is also brought over from Above the Earth Haunted, as the song reinforces the theme that the best way to approach life is by making decisions based on perseverance and assessing the world and yourself. Life is uncontrollable, but chaos can be harnessed and converted into something productive. Overall, the most important idea is that everyone just needs to communicate and have empathy towards each other. Sure, we might have built a system that works for the largest single contingent of people. Everyone that's supposedly normal can live exactly well enough that they don't need any institutional change. Very few people actually fit into the definition of normality, since being a part of that contingent requires falling into the mean on countless different levels, which is statistically improbable. The system works for the predominant minority, but we need to change it so that it would work for everyone. The other side of this song deals with Digi's own anxieties about herself. Not only does she want everyone else to keep going, she also doesn't want to quit herself. She wants to leave her impact on the world and change it so it would be a better place for people like her. The song is a personal self-affirmation as much as it is a message to others. Heat Death is a song that epitomizes the post-Bedrock Bedrock but pre-K and Dead era. It deals with personal struggles in a world that does not make sense. It's a self-assured call for empathy, with the bitter doubts that a better future might not necessarily manifest itself. It's a full-blown ode to how Digi can't bring herself to fully abandon humanity, even after all the alienation she faces. It places itself in a long line of self-aware songs that explore the facets for why Digi is alienated. The fact that she chose her own isolation is brought to full light, alongside strongly affirming that even despite the fact that she created her own isolation, the world at large is still so insane that she can't ever consider a life immersed within the norms of society. But she can still observe it and hope to change it. It also exemplifies that Digi does not want to take a nihilist position on life, but is forced to, due to the way she thinks. She wants to experience the most she possibly can, but she's stuck in her own negative thoughts. Even though she can hold out hope and keep working towards something better, the true issue she has to tackle is her own mindset. The song concludes with the message that life in itself is a constant struggle, yet Digi is afraid of missing out. She only needs things to change soon enough that she could still enjoy life. The hope inherent in her message shines through really strongly here. It's not that Digi is ready to lay it down and rot, but rather that she has to keep fighting and struggling to reach the life that she knows she can live. It's just a matter of how to get to it. I've already talked about Dopamine enough that I don't think it would do the song justice to impartially break it down. It's a song about the crushing loneliness that comes with realizing that you're to blame for alienating people. It's a song about realizing what you yourself have become, but not regretting it. Everything is coalesced into the current time for a reason, and the only thing that can be changed is the future. And even if everyone leaves you, and even if you're left in isolation, you can work towards a future where things are better, where someone can exist on the same wavelength, and ultimately, it's your own responsibility to find a way to be able to exist and communicate with other people. The hardest part of being isolated is that the only way to get out of it is through other people, which is hard when you're already alone. Ultimately, Open is another song where Digi accepts her audience in a way that she doesn't accept herself, hoping that even if she herself can't feel accepted, she can offer some acceptance to others by understanding them. But in as much as she can understand others, she needs to be understood. However, she thinks that for anyone to understand her, they would have to go through an unfair share of emotional turmoil. At this point, Digi feels like the degree of her alienation and outsideness is too much for anyone else to handle. So even though she wants to feel the same type of understanding she can give others, she's not willing to accept herself enough to not feel guilty about the way she is. But she wants to be understood more than she wants to not hurt anyone. At the time of writing this song, there was no way to know that these feelings were temporary, even if they would never completely disappear. I can only criticize this overly self-critical outlook because I know how the story ends. At the same time, I cannot be as self-critical as Digi was in Open. I still think that I'm ultimately a person who alienates others. When I'm providing a critique of a mindset where isolation becomes a self-reinforcing mechanism, I'm critiquing my own life. Because sure, I do want the future to be better, and I also miss all the friends that have left my life, but I haven't managed to take the steps to move past it. So when I can confidently say that Bedrock is my 2017 and Above the Earth Haunted is my 2018, then Emotional Anime Raps would be my 2019. But when it comes to the narrative of Digi, Emo Raps is another current to Above the Earth. It's not a distinct step in her personal journey the same way that Manic and Manic Low is, so here I personally diverge with this narrative. I need to completely fold the experience emotions described here. And when maybe I move up, I will not appreciate the post-K and Ted albums as much as I do now. Maybe at that point, they too will only feel like the emotional background noise. Emo raps too could become my own emotional baseline, and then it will not make me feel anything because I already feel everything expressed in it. But none of this is guaranteed, and all of it is something that I can only hope for. So I'm left here, much like Digi was 2.5 years ago. I can only keep struggling and hoping, and as long as I don't quit moving forwards, and as long as I don't stop holding out hope, I will experience feelings I didn't even know I could have. I too could not be missing out, and then maybe I will come back to emotional anime raps, thinking about how silly it was at one point, that was all I felt, and then maybe I will listen to the album and feel something real. Mono no Aware is my favorite song from the album from a musical standpoint. The song teaches rapping to fit the theme of the lyrics, and the delivery is one of the best from this era. Overall, this has been the song I like the most from the album, just because it's really fun to listen to. Whenever it comes on, it instantly pulls me back into the trance that only Trial of the Golden Witch can put me in. Even the small mistakes in audio editing have become lovable parts of the song. I can't even begin to count the times where I have put on one Trial album just to end up listening to 5. Usually, I have a hard time getting real into something, but if Trial is not even a question for me. It just pulls me into its own world with its own rules, and listening to individual songs is a great disservice to how well the albums themselves are put together. So I have to listen to full albums. How could I truly even enjoy Mono no Aware without listening to Open first? And how can I like Open as much as I do without having the mood set by Heat Death? The sequencing of these songs is so obvious and so apparent that there aren't any spots where I could fall out of the album. Sure, a song might be too long and I might want to listen to something else, but I know that the next song is precisely the song that I will want to listen to after this one ends. And if one album ends, I'm always in the mood for some more Trial. After emotional anime raps ends, I almost always go with emotional anime raps too. If I finish the album and I'm not hearing Faith in Humanity, it just feels wrong. It's almost like the two albums were made to be played in sequence, and knowing Trial, they probably were. I can imagine Digi just looking at the 5 songs in emotional anime raps too, and deciding to start with the one that's the best to listen to after Mono no Aware. But I guess since I have already talked about the lyrical content of every other Trial song thus far, I should keep going with Mono no Aware. Ultimately, it's just a recap of the themes that we are already familiar with. Digi is moving on from her current complacency and moving towards better goals. The song is a mission statement, functionally ending the period of her life that above the wanted encapsulated. She does not plan to keep being trapped in her own complacency, and she can accept the drifting lifestyle due to realizing how she herself will keep alienating people. She has invented a plan that she hopes will work for her, and can realize the hope she already expressed in the rest of the 2 albums. She will be a nomad, and she will enjoy every part of it. She can live with the fact that she might never find true understanding from any single person. But she still hopes that she does. She has to be a nomad, but doesn't really want to be one. She will respect her past and work towards her future, letting her present be defined by what's best for everyone. Unknown to her, a new purpose will be found in just a few months, but before we tackle that, we need to talk about K and Ted. Double album Interlude. K and Ted is a double album. There. It's just 2 albums built around being K and Ted. The first one is a bit more K, and the second one is a bit more Ted. So even though Digi tries to sell this album as her first real long album, it's really not. It's just 2 20-ish minute albums pretending that they're one long album. Even though I will go over K, I've not given it anywhere near as close of a look as will Ted. And in some way, the narrative through line of all of these albums is really disrupted by the presence of K. But now that I have split the album into 2, I can issue the necessary corrections to my own timeline alongside the journey of Digi. Only a year apart, both of us hit our respective bedroom bedrocks. Digi accomplished career success as Digi, and I managed to leave my own bedroom by my own means. We both clawed our way above the earth and started to come to terms with how that can't solve our problems, and got really emotional about it afterwards. Digi went and made anime raps about it. And finally, here we both are right now. In the past 3 weeks, I have myself become Ted, a person who can accept my own brokenness and keep going in the face of it. Even though it has always been funny to me how broken everything is and how broken I am, I no longer have to hide it. And even though K doesn't really represent a step in Digi's journey to me, nor does it coincide with a step in my own journey, it's still a funny album. It might drag on for a bit long, and a lot of the cringe in it might be way too strong, but it exists and it can be analysed. K and Ted. This album is where Digi stops being an amateur rapper and becomes a rap artist. Before K and Ted, none of the delivery was refined, and it really felt like Digi was not in control of how the music really turned out. She had been improving as time went on, but this was the big breaking point. The music was no longer carried by the strength of its message. Furthermore, the people who provided the beats for this album had an actual professional relationship with Digi. Before, she just rapped over anime songs or whatever her brother sent her. But now the production of the album was becoming structured. The grimy tone in the album combines perfectly with the cringe, and the entire aesthetic is very well put together. And even though I'm a huge fan of MC Shide's beats, some of the best tracks on this album are produced by other people. Overall, it's by far the most put together experience thus far. How put together the album is contrasts heavily with how the album deals with everything falling apart. While Bedrock was a story about what's necessary to leave the lowest points in life, K and Ted revels in the chaos of depression and moderate insanity. Instead of being upset about anything, the album decides to approach everything falling apart in the most jovial way possible. K. Honestly, the K section is included in the book for the sake of completion. If you're familiar with the record and not interested in me matter-of-factly talking about the meaning behind each song, feel free to skip this part. I don't really have many unique insights that you can't get from 5 to 10 listens to the album. The good stuff is a chapter down in Dead. K opens up with Broken Brilliance, a song with a title far deeper than the subject matter. It just reiterates that for Digi, the most important thing is staying true to herself and accepting the person she already is. She's reckless by her own design without any thoughts to spare for how others think of her. She opens up more about her lifestyle and pivots to contrive that into the self-loathing we have come to expect. Except this time the self-loathing is proud. Digi doesn't want to be normal anymore. She understands that happy people with decent lives just don't want her to be in their lives, but she also reinforces that her existence is a way for people on the outskirts of society to relate to a person. The hope from previous projects completely fades and the world becomes a sandbox. Once you give up trying to fit in, you can enjoy the chaos and despair behind everything. In Paradise, hopelessness continues. The song opens up with disappointment towards the fact that even the best life Digi could come up with isn't that good. So even though the illusions established in Bedrock have been completely destroyed, it was not necessarily due to failing to accomplish what she wanted. More likely, the real failure was in setting up the wrong goals. Despite almost reaching what amounts to the greatest success she could think of, the empty feelings described in Above the Roof want to take her back and firmly establish that not everything can be solved that easily. She follows this sentiment up by further describing her lack of desire to conform to society. However, she reiterates that if she could change herself, she would be a different person. But the most interesting part of the song, although I might be reading too much into this, is following a couple of rhymes with a clunky flow with a statement that there is no rule to rhyme. If this isn't intentional, it's at least a very meaningful accident. Jesse chimes in the second half of the song by expressing his own loneliness even after reaching a point in life where he does have fans. He also showcases his view of how striving to be a great artist is not something that he chooses to do, but it's something that he has to do. He's stuck with his own desire to become something great and won't stop until he reaches that goal. And even if this makes it hard for others to be close to him, he needs to follow through with it. He can only hope to find acceptance. Fall on the Piece is about two things. The first is Digi being dismayed at the way people have been reacting to her. She wants to be completely in control of her art, and she doesn't want to be influenced by other people. But it's not like she wants to be in this position. She would escape if she had the chance to. She wouldn't work as hard as she does if she could do something else. But the way she wants to live requires letting other people judge her work. The second thing the song is about is her lack of love life, which ties into the first part by incorporating some figure that would accept her and lead her to a healthier lifestyle. But she personifies what she wants as a girl with a similarly unhealthy lifestyle. After doing this, she complains about an ex-girlfriend who frustrated her and concludes by stating that her loneliness is caused by hating other people. This song is also the first where Digi stops fearing mortality. Gone is the desperation to live forever. She started admiring people who have the capacity to take their own lives. Instead of looking for hope and inspiration, she has given in to hopelessness, but she doesn't have the strength to give up all hope. She can only look up to real nihilists. Gayer Than God is another ode to chaos, sprinkled with dashes of narcissism and horniness. Digi describes how she has created an image of herself while promoting that image some more. In this song, she's a mythical entity who can challenge God and her own loneliness. Gayer Than God is followed up by another meme. There's definitely meaning to ascertain from these two songs, but they're subsumed under a torrent of sheer chaos, which continues in Buttfucker's Anthem, a song about how much Digi appreciates the find behind. It's fun, completely scattered, and incredibly gross. However, these two songs do demonstrate the artistry inherent in the setting of trial albums. Their sequencing is definitely the best it could be. They're both really fun and drive the mood up. The album starts with songs that reinforce how much having given up can be, and once the listener is in that mood, it hits them with the sheer nihilist chaos of these two songs. Freak Power only gives a taste of a break from this insanity. The vocal samples of Andreas Thompson in the song give it the calmer edge than the lyrics would imply. And even though the song starts by putting Digi in a position where she has been driven out by society, the rest of the first half is about fighting the society that pushed her where she is. She embraces her own insanity and finds herself completely in control of everything outside normal society. The second half goes over her own success once more, except without any tinge of emptiness or regret, because now it's not framed as something that she herself was left empty by, but as a way of showing up everyone who ever doubted her. Even though she's still an outsider to society, she's accomplished everything she wanted to accomplish, and she has managed to not conform to what anyone else expected of her. The violence inherent in this song is contrasted with the vocal samples that calmly explain the fact that someone can be a freak in America and function the way they want. So while the song itself is about using spite to keep fighting, the overall tone is even borderline reconciliative. Even though Digi has had to fight society, it has been possible to do it due to the opportunities she has. The bunker amps up the insanity again. It mostly amounts to a more fantastical version of Rotten. Instead of trying to document the state that Digi and Jesse find themselves in, it tells a story of something more deranged. This itself is referenced in the song. Overall, it's just Rotten on amphetamines. With Quarter, we get a hint of the upcoming Dead album. The chorus is a deep reflection of how Digi still hasn't grown up. She might have achieved success, but has been reinforced in multiple previous songs. She doesn't really know how she reached this point. However, her frustration with being unappreciated still grows. She views herself as a reclusive artist who has something far deeper to express than most people give her credit for. The song concludes with reiterating both her naivety and desire to become an even greater artist. This leads into space-chilling Interlude that basically just serves to wind down the insanity in Gay and make more room for what's to come in Dead. The content in itself boils down to what the rest of the album has been trying to say. Digi has succumbed to the madness and lost all desire to do what's right. She's done with others and the criticism she receives, and she's ready to drop Fat and Dangerous. Dead. Now, although my overview of Gay has been divorced from a lot of personal sentiment, the same isn't true for Dead. The next 5 songs from this totally intentionally double album are some of my favourite songs in Trial history. They still retain a similar aesthetic and theme, but they're so much more significant to me personally. Instead of being mostly jokes with themes of alienation and insanity, they were much deeper takes into the actual emotional state of Digi. Fat and Dangerous is the best Trial of the Golden Witch single. It describes the entirety of Dead, and it has something for everyone. Even people who aren't into the instrumentals can appreciate the lyrics, and people who can't appreciate the lyrics can usually appreciate the instrumentals. For someone to not connect to either side of the song, they would have to be the biggest normie alive. But this doesn't necessarily mean that it's my favourite Trial song. As much as I love Dead, and as much as I think it's the best song without any context, it doesn't have the greatest impact on me. Emotionally, I connect the most with Sad Boy Anthem, and Manic is consistently amazing in its entirety. Although it does peak at human connections. But even under those parameters, Fat and Dangerous would be my third favourite Trial song, which is a fairly high bar. The song itself follows the theme of the rest of the album. Digi is a broken person of dubious moral character, but proud of it. Despite being called Fat and Dangerous, it's a relatively straightforward song about drowning yourself in alcohol to cope with having to be alive. But even so, unlike the entirety of Gay, it starts offering a completely unfiltered view into the mindset of Digi. The layers of honest cringe and ironic meme are still present, but now serve to accentuate the songs. The meaning has overtaken the aesthetic, and this is why Dead stands out to me. Even though the chorus is still very abrasive and intentionally cringy, and there are plenty of obscure references in the verses, the message shines through very clearly. Digi is simple and alcoholic, has stopped caring about any social norms that she might have otherwise been beholden to. She is alienated by society, and it's her own fault for being abrasive, dangerous and strange. It's also another song that venerates suicide, although this time not through direct action, but just drinking yourself to death. So although it has been established that Digi still retains a functionally ignorant view of mortality, she is now content on some level with finding an early death through alcoholism. Digi also does not present herself as a necessarily dangerous person. The entire danger is how disruptive her lifestyle can be, instead of anything she actually does. Not to say that it's a bad thing that she plays up her own danger to society. If the feelings involved in Trial were straightforward and linear, then most of the intrigue that the project has would simply disappear. It's not like Trial is ever supposed to provide a clean look into the life of Digi or any specific emotional state. The project is about expressing very complex emotions in complex ways. So even though the entire album hinted at it, this song reveals that Digi is currently at her breaking point. Everything is too insane to deal with, and she just wants to get drunk. And it just gets darker from here. The second leg of the album is a downhill journey. Killing yourself with alcohol while you keep getting fatter is just the beginning. Nihilistic Suburban Void is just a reflection of needing to leave Virginia Beach and go live somewhere else. It describes the place she's stuck in as a hopeless hellscape where she can't live the rest of her life. But she does express that her feelings about her location can only be temporary and she might return. The song also puts Stitch in a place of being confused at why she even exists in the world. She understands that she is incapable of truly being a part of society and puts herself in a position where she isn't an actor without any power. But she can't take her life into her own hands by leaving. No one can build anything in Virginia Beach, so she has to go somewhere to build something of her own. And once she has tried to do that, she might understand more about the world and can more aptly choose the direction where she wants to take her own life. Overall, I really love the song for being self-confidently experimental and shamelessly abrasive, and it only gets weirder after this album. The previous albums have been plenty experimental from a very naive standpoint, but from this point onwards, there's no real expectations of being bound to more poppy sensibilities. Trial is not a project that makes normal music for normal people, and even though Buttfucker's anthem was already loud and weird, it didn't quite capture the same essence that later projects and tracks would have. And of course, Nihilistic Suburban Void is still a relatively naive take at experimentation, mostly just copying existing projects and styles. And although those styles are a perfectly valid way to express very primal sentiments, the unique complexity will only increase here. Some tracks and later projects will have a lot more depth than anything thus far. The later projects all sound a lot more sonically interesting than the earlier ones. As MC Shide becomes more confident at creating beats, as Digi becomes more adept at being a rap artist, the depth of the projects only keeps increasing. And when Digi creates her own beats and backing tracks, things get even weirder and more experimental. Since Digi often doesn't really put a lot of focus in making her songs fun, preferring to make them interesting and impactful, she's far more likely to make whatever she does really fucking weird. Body Rolls is another song that talks about how Digi keeps staying true to herself. Even if she's a bad person, she has bad habits and is stuck in a bad situation. But even so, she has unique talents and can do a lot by expressing them. To deal with feeling a lot of negative things, she's slipping deeper into her own career as a form of dealing with what she's going through. But her being a bad person isn't tied to any sort of malice. She tries to be an empathetic person and a good artist. However, the direction where her life is taking her isn't leading to the sort of functioning most people think she should strive for. She's still constantly improving and learning more about how to live life as herself, which she has the potential to do. So even if she has to put up with suicidal ideation, the world isn't going to take her down. But the more interesting part of the song are the parts at the beginning and end where Digi is conversing with herself and which flow into and out of the chaotic chorus. Her frustration with others not understanding her and continuing to critique her has been a reoccurring theme throughout the album, and here she overtly states, such just that others talk shit about her, none of them are actually worthwhile artists on their own. They can talk as much as they want, but none of them have anything to back the talk up. Other people might have ideas about how to change something that Digi does, but if she changed anything from pressure, she wouldn't be staying true to herself. And this will only be a stronger motif going forward, as when the huge pivot of Manic High, Manic Low comes and this kind of self-loathing starts to weaken, staying true to herself will be even more important. But now we can move on to Daydreamer, Sad Gay Boy. While Fat and Dangerous is a top-tier single, Daydreamer gets pretty close to being as good as Fat and Dangerous. The only thing holding it back is lacking the same sort of wide appeal that Fat and Dangerous can have, and although it's still not my favourite song, and probably not even my fourth favourite, it's somewhere in the top 10. It parallels Waves at Dawn in Bedrock. It's a very heartfelt look into the overarching mental state of Digi at the time of creating the album. In a way, the song is a kind of a slice of life when it comes to what kind of life Digi is living. And the songs about staying up late in your own room are some of my favourites. They don't need to put up a facade or fall into a message. They just capture a moment with a unique sense of beauty. And in a weird way, I do think that everything seemingly depraved in this album is incredibly beautiful. No matter how full of crime it is, and no matter what goes on in the bunker, nothing can distract from the raw beauty of honesty. A fake idea of what life is can never capture any form of real value. The realness comes out in full force in Daydreamer and hits doubly hard. When all the layers of levity get dropped and when the crime falls off, all we're left with is a sad boy we have been observing throughout the album. She's not a powerful cosmic entity who can overtake anything, she's not a genius beyond questioning, and she's not even a suicidal madman. All that we have seen have just been expressions of an individual that is truly just broken, sad and lonely. It's not as if that's a thing that should be promoted either, which is why I really hesitate calling anything that takes place in the album beautiful. Even if I like the darker parts of life, is it really good that I do? But it's not just being sad that makes authentic feelings beautiful. The willingness to share them and to put them on full display is what really matters. And when it comes to Daydreamer, the entire mask that album had been operating under falls off. The boistering no longer means anything. Digi is a human. She just wants to find a good life for herself, and she just wants to find a human connection. She has to keep true to herself, and she doesn't know how to do much outside of acting on her talents and feeling her needs. Digi brings herself out of alienation. She's now not only a storyteller, but she's also the story, and a part of her story is having made the rest of the album, and how the music is born out of all the feelings she's currently experiencing. The song takes place in an evening and a morning during which she's recording music. She should be sleeping, but she doesn't know how to adjust her normal life, so she makes music instead. She's just waiting for something to pull her into a better way of living, but she can keep going, and she can keep making things that are good. And even when she goes to sleep, she can't really rest. She's scared that she will lose what makes her herself. So she gets back up, takes care of her basic needs, and goes to make more music. And she's still waiting for someone who she can connect with. And the day ends. She's been up until the morning already. It's time to go back to sleep. Throughout most of the discography of Trial, Digi has kept telling stories about Digi, but she hasn't really been Digi. Even when she refers to herself, and even when she talks about herself, there's always a layer of posturing involved. Everything gets overplayed or played off. Everything becomes some degree of fiction derived from her real feelings. But here there's no real sense of fiction, just a story that feels like it's been lived. This theme continues in the next song that explicitly tackles the separation between the person Digi is and the character Digi plays. The final track of the album makes it clear that the identity of Digi as an artist is consuming her real life. She's lost control over who she is to an extent that she herself doesn't even know her real identity. Even though she has multiple compatriots in her art, her loneliness as a person does not dissipate. The people who can help her increase the potency of her creative endeavours do not necessarily connect with her that much on a non-artistic level. But it's not because they are to blame, but rather because she alienated herself. Any form of normalcy that she might have had before has been completely warped by her devotion to her craft. It's not only that she is a fundamentally alienating person, but also that she has chosen to live in a way that the people she knew can't follow. She's running away and just waiting to die. She could fix the relationship she has, but she finds herself incapable. It would be easier to run away and find something new. Especially given that the way she lives is already not the way she wants to live, and since she's already being consumed by her own art, she can't even imagine interacting with people just as herself. And so concludes K and Dead. Although the paid version has a bonus track that brings the ending of the album together with the beginning in another example of great album setting. Bonus is not a good song and it doesn't really have any meaning, but serves a good purpose as it brings much needed levity to the experience of Dead. But K and Dead is not really the end of this era. Before the giant tone shift that will come in Manic High, Manic Low, you have Ain't Your Shit as a quick middle ground. So although Digi had already met May at this point and gotten what she was looking for, her albums weren't yet coloured by the change in lifestyle she experienced. Ain't Your Shit is just a quick 2 tracks, one talking about how her music is intentionally loud and abrasive. This one doesn't really need any explanation. Digi likes loud music. But Get My Bread, Fix My Head is a much more interesting song. This is because it functionally transfers the narrative into one where she had just found a girlfriend. So although it's self-explanatory insofar as she is cleaning her bread and fixing her head, it's still a functional curiosity. It retains the same angsty violence of Gay and Dead. It talks about her relationship in a similar way to later albums. My descent into Trial. After only being really into Trial of the Golden Witch for a few days, I discovered emotional anime raps too. And while the first emo raps didn't really impact me that much, the second one had a really sweeping feeling. From the start of Faith in Humanity to the end of Sad Boy Anthem, I was on the emotional ride of my life. And even though Smoking Gun and Blue Mayo weren't anywhere near as impactful for me, the first 3 songs really shined through as something special. Even though I already really liked other albums at this point, I wouldn't have considered myself that much of a Trial fan, but now I was. I wasn't just a casual listener, listening to songs made by a YouTuber that I kinda liked. I was a fan of this project, and I was a fan of this music. It didn't take too long for me to discover Coasts and listen to that album, pulling me ever deeper and deeper into Trial. With Manic High, Manic Low, the pull wasn't anywhere near as immediate as it was with Coasts or emo raps too, but it was still very much present. I was running out of music that I hadn't listened to shreds, so I turned to the projects I hadn't heard yet. Manic High, Manic Low. When I played Manic High for the first time, I was put off. But then when I switched to Manic Low, I realized that there was a lot going on in the album. If I could separate Manic High and Manic Low into two albums, my favorite trial album would be Manic Low. But then again, Manic Low in itself can't really be considered a true album. It's just 5 minutes and 3 short songs. But when it comes to how much I like any individual trial song, all of these are up there. Human Connections is probably my favorite trial song. It gets reinforced fantastically by the songs that surround it. And even though Manic High itself took more time to really get accustomed to, I still love it. Way Up and Heaven are both fantastic songs, but just lacks the same impact with its central midpoint. You're the One feels like a love song made by someone who's new to love, which in all fairness is exactly what it is. But that doesn't negate the awkward nature of it. It really lacks the same manic energy that the rest of the double EP has. A testament of how good Trial is at arranging albums is that without having ever read the Bandcamp description that states that the two EPs are supposed to be listened to on repeat for as long as you want to, I had already figured that out on my own. After finishing Manic Low, the first thought that popped into my head was that listening to Manic High would be really nice. So not only are the albums arranged in a very good way, they're arranged in a very intuitive way. Because the best song to listen to after Feeler is Way Up. It even makes narrative sense in that order. And I guess that's really a big part of what I want to get across with this project. The albums are all just set beautifully. Bedrock is a journey away from the lowest point in your life. Above the Earth Haunted represents the exact thematic stasis it's meant to. Emotional Anime Raps 2 follows Emotional Anime Raps 1. Gay and Dead goes from Gay to Dead. Albums should be seen as an art form, and there's a lot to extract from albums. But sadly, most albums don't really do this. I can be left to wonder what would happen if some of the greatest albums of all time were set as well as the trial albums that were just made by two people. But maybe a large part of why trial can be so good is that albums are not necessary anymore, with how everything is now streamed. It's not like anyone has to even put effort into albums to be successful. And there are a lot of artists that have their songs enhanced by listening to their albums, but most it's not really worth it if you already know all the songs you like. Sure, I could go listen to The Queen instead, but it's not going to enhance There Is a Light That Never Goes Out anywhere near enough to be worth it when I just want to listen to that one song. But when it comes to trial, it's almost never the case. Most of the time, listening to an entire 15 to 40 minute albums does improve all the songs in it enough that listening to any of them in isolation is just not the same. The mood needs to be set right to enjoy the songs to their full potential, and trial does everything to make sure that it is. The songs get so significantly enhanced by being listened to in the album order that it's really hard to separate any of them from the context of their albums. This is probably in large part because trial isn't constrained by traditional album ordering. A lot of the conventions that go into the way most albums are ordered are completely absent, and trial projects are enhanced by it. That aside, I feel like it's a good time to get into the actual album itself and start with Way Up. The most obvious thing when going into it is that it's going to be way more experimental than anything that came before it. MC Shido has really started producing distinct and weird beats, while Digi has gotten more innovative with her lyrics and her delivery has drastically improved. Production-wise, this album sometimes seems like a grown-up Bedrock, and when it comes to the lyrics, that sentiment is further reinforced. Nothing about the album feels naive, although it can still stylistically stumble when it expresses naive sentiments, but satellite awkwardness comes from nowhere. It's derived from the growing pains inherent in the life that Digi is facing, so in a way the album itself represents stumbling through a transitional phase. While Digi had opened her mind with Beat by Gay and Dead, drugs are front and center in Manic High and Manic Low. The overall message of Way Up is that Digi has finally become able to calm down due to the influence of her girlfriend, and while the album isn't as lyrically dense as the earlier work, there's still a few layers to work through. The first one is a theme that Digi will be exploring in this album. The feeling of wanting to leave her online personality behind and live a relatively anonymous life. In Way Up, Digi strongly believes that she could just leave everything behind and not suffer too much for it since she already has what she wants in real life. This will be relevant later once you come down from the Manic High and get into the Manic Low. But it wouldn't be a trial song if it was just a fairly straightforward song built around a few themes. The other big theme that will become even more relevant as the album goes on is that Digi now has the ability to reject the people around her. She doesn't need to rely on people she doesn't want to rely on. Even though she might have felt somewhat fulfilled by the time of Above the Earth, now she has started to be completely in control due to living her own fulfilling life. But Way Up is not a song about being unrestrained, it's about becoming unrestrained. This allows it to be a song that leads into the rest of Manic High, but also the perfect song to listen to after hearing Manic Low. Its beat is relatively relaxed, and it doesn't create a frenzied mood in the same way that other songs have a potential to. But the next song is where I think Manic stumbles. You're the One is not as good. And even though Manic Glow is one of my favourite trial projects, the only thing holding it back from being my absolute favourite is You're the One. And it's not like the song doesn't have great parts. It opens up fantastically by telling the story of how Digi formed a connection with a woman who would save her from her isolation. The rest of the first half keeps up with this vibe, defining hopes for the future and creating an attitude of a dream Manic high. It's fantastic and romantic. Definitely has the appropriate tone in a song about someone who doesn't seem to be the one. Overall, it perfectly captures the emotions evoked by a person who Digi feels romantically about, but can also finally feel comfortable around. A culmination of the years of loneliness described in all of the previous albums. But then comes the chorus. It might be incredibly artistic, but this is the part of the song that just pulls me out of the experience. No matter what I do, I can't help but picture Digi just leaning over, looking to the camera like an old MTV hip-hop music video, and vaguely shaking her hands while repeating You're the One. It's not that it would even be a bad aesthetic if that was exactly what that was going for, except the way that the lines are delivered has way too much awkwardness and edge to them to fit the mood of the song. It's not the same kind of edge that characterizes most of Trial, but feels more like pretend edge. It's hard to describe what exactly rubs me in such a wrong way about this small part of the song, but there's something definitely there. Maybe it's that the delivery makes the lyrical content seem overplayed and inauthentic. It seems like Digi was unable to accept having the genuine emotion she professes to have, and the appeal of Trial lies most in its unrelenting authenticity, so small crack in the realness is an actual issue. But maybe she was just having an off moment when she was recording the song. I can't know for sure. All I know is that every time I listen to the song, this takes me out of it without exception. But the song soon resumes, and two very important things for her journey of Digi have happened here. First, she has accepted mortality to an extent. This unravels a large thread. It's not that Digi was afraid of mortality itself back in Bedrock or emotional anime raps, but rather she was afraid of never experiencing life as she wanted to. The fear of mortality can now be recontextualized as being another aspect of the desperate desire to find a way to live. So instead of being just an immature way to look at death, it was just a desire to experience life. Second, she has stopped being a solitary person. The power with which she can now relate to another person has completely overwhelmed her isolation. She has stayed true to herself, but the person she is right now is inexorably tied to being with another person. And all of this is great. The themes explored are amazing, the song itself is nice, the beat is hypnotizing. And then comes the end with the chorus. I don't know why these are so bad for me. I don't know what part of my autism gets so triggered that it brings the rest of the song down a solid notch. But somehow it does. It might seem like a minor flaw, but the music doesn't really work like that. Every single individual part of a song interacts with the rest of the song. Even one wrong note can completely change the way a song sounds, and one off line can change the entire theme of a song. And the same goes for an EP. If one song on it seems a bit off, the entire EP has a cascading problem. And I know this is nitpicking, but ultimately when it comes to critiquing something you love to an extent where every single minor detail is etched permanently into your memory, those minor details start mattering a lot. It might even be that this is something that has never bothered anyone else, and if someone else listens to this song, they might even appreciate that part of it. But I'm not anyone else, and my experiences with Trial are all my own. And ultimately these lines bring the double EP down from a relative 10 to a relative 9. Although I could not possibly rate any of Trial on a true decimal scale. This is because I have such a unique relationship with it compared to any of the other music I've listened to. The only point of comparison that I have to each Trial song and Trial album is the rest of the discography. I guess ultimately what bothers me about such a small stumbling point is a potential for perfection that otherwise could have existed. But it's not like I would change it if I could. Having listened to something over and over again makes it impossible to truly want to have it be any other way. The familiarity I have built up with the song is way too great to even conceptualize a world where it is different. Interjecting again from the future. Who could have thought that so much of this book would become a weird time travel experience? You're the voice of autumn, fixes everything, and is that perfect song I was looking for. Obviously, I still would not change the original because it remains its own unique thing and experience. They don't want to have a different experience with it. However, the remix creates a new experience that I think is overall superior. Heavenly Smosh is just reframing the central conflict that appears in all the previous songs, which is the battle between Digi and the criticism she receives online. On many previous songs, she has talked about how much she actually is affected by having to face what people think of her. And although this is motivated by just wanting to stay true to her artistic vision, which others seemingly can't understand, the emotion itself was immature. Heavenly leaves all of that behind, bluntly stating that Digi is not going to engage with these types of people anymore. It also serves as a thesis to how her creative vision is just a matter of what she herself wants to create, her own life is fulfilled, so she doesn't need to listen to what other people have to say about her art anymore. Heaven is a song about how making your own life better makes you more self-reliant. Creating your own ideal life isn't just about getting to a fabricated high point, but rather by creating the setting you need to thrive. The Manic high was just a successful version of trying to get above the earth. And while that attempt failed, the Manic high is real and lacks the hollowness of the previous attempt. In that way, Heaven is a confident statement of successfully having created your own life. And when way up was a ramp up to reaching the Manic high, Heaven is the ramp down. If Manic high was a graph, it would be a near perfect bell curve of emotion. But Heaven is still a song that conveys the state of the Manic high, but it prepares the listener for the impending Manic low. And for me, Manic low is inherently a striking idea. The idea that you could experience manic and low feelings at the same time clicks on an inherent level. I've always resonated with sad music due to having been a relatively sad person through most of my life. Hopelessness and the lack of energy go hand in hand to create the typical sounds I relate to. Although the bluesy sound requires a certain touch of carelessness to come together, and that kind of carelessness isn't something that can be gotten from most trial albums. The Emotional Anime Raps albums display a different sort of carelessness by just choosing backing tracks from anime instead of curated music, but it's still not the same thing. So with Trial, the emotional resonance was derived from the story and artistry, but not always the sound itself. Of course I appreciate the sound. I'm a big fan of experimental music and just trying out alternative things. And as someone who genuinely does appreciate a ton of music from functionally every genre in popular culture, it's not like it being melodic hip-hop was ever detrimental to my enjoyment of Trial. But it didn't make me feel the blues. It didn't make my soul bend in itself the way that a lot of other music does. To bring up some legendary songs, the eternal calms in The Passenger and the haunting emptiness in Paranoid are not blues in any traditional sense, but they do carry the spirit. The same can't really be said for anything in Trial's catalogue. The beats have mostly been in a different dimension and mostly served to enhance the lyrics. And I love a ton of the beats. I've described how I think a lot of them are some of the coolest beats I have ever heard. But then, it's not like many other beats have made me feel the same feeling that some instrumentals do. But this changes with Manic Low. I think the 3 songs here are the first songs in Trial's catalogue that truly distinguish themselves. It's not just that the beats serve the lyrics, the beats themselves become a very true and pure form of art. It's no longer that the power of the instrumental is subsumed and made servable to the vocals, it becomes its own emotional beast. The lyrics can only build off the instrumentals, fight with the instrumentals, and so a true complex series of emotions gets created. Combined with Digi becoming an actually great rap artist through Gay and Dead and doing improving since just enhances this effect tenfold. So as much as I love all the previous albums, I think this is inherently why I love Manic and Coast of MIDWINTER Polars so much. The previous albums did have their own charm, but this is something special. The sad part is that these would also be the last projects that were completely produced by MC Shaidu. Although I am happy that we at least got to see his complete creative vision realized before he hung up his hat and started working on something else. Both of those albums are still flawed, but at least they feel like a complete version of what Trial started. But I do love Emotional Anime Raps too a lot. It does capture a lot of the blues as I described. And even though Digi isn't fighting MC Shaidu's beats, she engages in a similar confrontation with the anime songs, which in my opinion is also a high point. And although it lacks the same sort of curated soul that other 2 albums have, it still manages to be as personal. These 3 albums are my favorites that Trial has ever made. In the same way that one era of Trial was the progression from Bedrock to Above the Earth Haunted, Emotional Anime Raps to Gay and Dead, these 3 albums represent the second era of Trial for me. Ain't Your Shit serves a good middle ground that can transfer the listener from one era to the next, and this second era is something that I truly vibe with, music that can truly capture my entire being. Anyway, back to the beats on Manic Low. Since they're mature and creatively complete, I feel like they can capture the promise of the album. They're definitely beats in a fairly low mood, but they're as much beats that convey a very manic tone. This tells me that the lyrics of the second half of the album had to adjust themselves to better fit the beats and tell a life story that's somewhat contorted to fit the aesthetic. In this sense, Manic Low is not a completely perfect step up in the conduit in the same manner that Gay doesn't really bother to paint an accurate picture of Digi. But I'm not saying that it's necessarily a dishonest addition to the ongoing story. There are definitely feelings that are felt, and these are emotions that do exist. They might be alien to me, but they're not really alien to Digi. However, I don't think the intensity with which they are portrayed necessarily reflects the way they were felt. So it comes to how I'm analyzing Manic Low, it might seem like I'm downplaying a lot of the songs and going digging for a meaning that contradicts with the exterior representation of the music. But from my perspective, it makes sense. And this intuition could be completely wrong. It might be that Digi was feeling aggressive when she wrote and recorded these, but I'm not going to treat Manic Low as an album about a tough, masculine Digi dealing with the wall she has built up. For me, this is an album about dealing with hurt, even when the source of it has been removed. It's about the feeling that you're still broken, even when you're fulfilled, that no matter how good things get, they will never heal the wounds the person has accumulated. And sure, a lot of this is informed by later songs in the Trial discography. When I first listened to the album, I did take it in a much more literal way. But over an uncountable number of listens, I feel like I have developed a somewhat more nuanced grasp over the tone it's actually conveying. Since Manic Low falls outside the block of albums I listened to when I first got into Trial, it's important to go over how I got into it. By the time I got into Manic Low, I had already fallen in love with Kane Dead and Bedrock. I was looking to listen to as much Trial content as I could, and I was starting to feel comfortable with stepping into new music, as I had deciphered the 2 albums I had been listening to on repeat. When I started listening to Manic Low, I was immediately deterred by Manic High. Instead of the intense, brooding, crimey beats of the previous albums, I was immediately greeted with the cheerful chimes of Way Up. I was almost put off from the album entirely, and I will only revisit it later if this was the end of it. But instead, I came back in a few minutes and went straight to Human Connections, and this is where everything clicked. I realized that there had to be some way that the first part can lead up to the crime I knew was coming, and I realized that there was some way the album will move past the apparent cheeriness. This created a sense of depth that I just wouldn't assume from Manic High. Manic High is not one of Trial's deepest projects. A lot of its depth comes from the fact that it's the other side of Manic Low, which is one of the densest and grimiest projects Trial has put up. And Manic Low starts with Habitual, a screeching, abrasive, noisy beat interlaced with vocals mixed to be rough and hazy, a complete holistic experience that immediately dives into the Manic Low, abandoning the mood set by Manic High. But it's not a deep dive, but rather a flip in perspective. The change is nowhere as big as it might seem at first. It's a gentle descent. Manic Low completely succeeds at being a sine wave of emotion, and Habitual represents the first step into the Manic Low mood. Habitual opens with describing the situation that Digi finds herself in. She's stuck living a life based around outdated coping mechanisms. Even though she has found herself a new life that she actually wants to live, she's still tied to her past through her obligations and income. But even more significantly, she still feels the mindset that used to be necessary for her to live. She still feels like she's broken and an outsider, which sets up the low part of Manic Low. No matter how manic Digi gets, it doesn't mean that she will necessarily change as a person. All she can do is try to stay true to herself and not give in to the negativity that's a fundamental part of her. All of this refers to the way she was feeling about other people in her profession at this point in time, and how she could not succeed by doing the same things everyone else was doing. But more importantly, this reflects on how it's not like people are immediately changed when their environment changes. Any true and long-lasting change in people comes from a very long time, or through an incredibly traumatic process. So it's not surprising that Digi returns to describing herself as someone dangerous throughout this song. But again, it's not that she is necessarily dangerous, just hurt from having been rejected by society for so long, and creating her own life doesn't necessarily let her make peace with everyone else. So these feelings get internalized. Digi starts projecting the image of herself that she has reverted to multiple times, this dangerous person who poses a threat to the established order of society. But here she's just open about herself. The song retains its manic atmosphere by diverting back into an outburst of confidence and a vision of being able to come to terms with society. But this too is couched with the statement that it's unlikely that Digi could ever get over herself. The song ends with reconsidering the theme that was already mentioned in Way Up, wanting to escape from the life that she had already built. But this time, it's under doubt. There's no guarantee that Digi could create a new life, or ever truly escape from being stuck in the life she created out of necessity. She doesn't know whether she can change herself enough to ever be someone different, and not just return to the lifestyle she has already built. Digi is just Digi, although living a new life now. I think this song is very clearly about a transitional stage in life, about the inherent frustration that comes with not being able to make a change in your entire being once that possibility opens up. Over the past albums, Digi has made herself out to be a person who wouldn't necessarily hurt and leave anyone who got close to her, but now she's close to someone who she doesn't necessarily have to hurt or leave. What that amounts to is a realization that she could become someone completely new, someone who isn't restricted by past experiences. But in her core, she fundamentally has to be the same person she has already been, no matter how much she would like to change herself. It's outside of her own capabilities. So she's stuck in a situation where there's an alternative direction, but pivoting from one life to another is hard. And this is the habitual. This is the life she has already built up. It's a life stuck halfway between two lives. Habits that were necessary to cope are brought over to a life where coping isn't necessary. And after habitual ramps up the mood, human connections embodies the Manic low aesthetic. The song kicks, screams, and lashes out at everyone around her. The newfound energy is channeled into the apotheosis of everything Digi had faced in her previous life. All of the frustration she had with people around her are brought out in one burst. Whether these are the people who have been thinking that they could beat Digi better than Digi could, or the people who she just has simply drifted away from. The song begins like many others. Digi is alienated and disenfranchised. Everyone is living a fake life, and the only reason she managed to avoid becoming a part of it is her deliberate removal of herself from normal society. But Digi has moved beyond having to accept being critiqued by people who don't know what they're talking about, as she now knows that she can sufficiently improve her own craft to a point where she herself can be satisfied with it. This verse is probably also referring to the downfall Digi had been seeing in the medium of anime, and how people tend to flock towards the lowest common denominator there. In this way, I think it's not specifically about the medium she's a part of, but also the medium that she enjoys. It's not just that people are wrong about her, but just that people generally tend to have bad taste when it comes to what they think they want and what they end up consuming. And even though I have avoided quoting the lyrics, because the purpose of this book is to tell the story of Trial of the Golden Witch, not dissect all of the wordplay used, the following line is one of the most memorable lines in the entire discography. I love all of the lyrics wholeheartedly, but most of them can be rephrased and explained in a way that fits better into the continuity I'm trying to convey, but here I can't improve upon it. So in the second verse, Digi rephrases the entire thesis of the first verse as such. No, you can't vote on me. Ballot box closed, homie. And although this inherently doesn't seem powerful, there's a lot to dissect from just one sentence. From context, it can be inferred that this is mostly a statement about how Digi won't become like everyone else, just because that's the most popular thing. But then when you get into the deeper levels of meaning, it gets more interesting. Or maybe it doesn't and I'm just reading too far deep into it. Both are options. The line implies two things. First, since she has to say that people can't vote on her and the ballot box is closed, it demonstrates a level of newfound independence. There had been an expectation that people could vote on her before, which she is now trying to shatter. It's not a permanent statement that has been true throughout all of history, but rather a new decree that she's setting in place right now. Second, the way it's delivered with more levity than the previous verse, alongside the word homie at the end, implies that it's not an inherently malicious line, and it has some degree of jest in it, which leads to it having the implication that this change was brought on via internal reasons and not because any person has done anything wrong. The reason she closed the proverbial ballot box to you in the sentence is because she's self-satisfied enough to not need it. In the context of the song, however, the line is used to set up many more aggressive statements directed at the you involved in the process. This is the same thing that I described before. I think Digi intentionally made the Manic Low part of the double EP more aggressive and outwardly directed to better match the mood of the beats. Since I'm viewing this part of the song as shutting down all critique, I think it should be viewed as Digi asserting that even though she can't stand what people want, she has just developed the ability to let outside influences slide. From my interpretation, the actual issues she used to have with people criticizing her are in the past, and even though this verse is a facsimile of those, it lacks a lot of the same substance. And it's not like Digi has found a way to actually completely ignore the feedback she gets, which is why she's still bothered by it on the level demonstrated in the song, but rather she's declaring that she's not going to respond emotionally to it in the future. The song continues and develops the theme that was established at the end of Habitual. Digi is still the same person, just going into a different direction. She's going to keep creating a life where she's more true to herself than she had been in the past, and where she can feel even more in control when it comes to her life. This also ties back into Way Up, and goes back to those themes insofar as it establishes that everyone who observes her from the outside should stick to their role as an outside observer. Then the song pivots into talking about personal relationships that Digi has had and how most of them have disappeared, and how the only person she really cares about right now is her girlfriend. Even though she has a tendency to pass other people by and not form strong relationships, she only needs one person. The people she has in her life are already enough, and she doesn't need to deeply care about more than a few people. And although she laid out her plan for the future in K and Ted as trying to make as many shallow connections as she can, she has now decided to just hold on to the people who are truly important to her, instead of caring about whatever the rest of humanity wants. And finally, Manic ends with Feeler, which is again a very overstated song. Digi really likes having sex and smoking weed. She also feels a lot of affection and devotion to her girlfriend. And even though she's still broken and the world is still alienating, she's found a life that she can live in the way she wants to live it. The genius in the song is in its placement in the album, as with a lot of Trial songs. Independently, it's still a really good song despite only being 50 seconds long, but when it's played as a way to come down from human connections and maybe even get back into way up, it's a great track. It falls perfectly between those two tracks if the intent of the listener is to play this album on repeat, and being only 50 seconds, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It manages to set the tone for life after a Manic low and before a Manic high. A life where Digi can calm down in a way that was described at the end of Human Connections and referenced in the start of Way Up. A life of satisfaction where nothing outside her own vicinity matters. And that's an amazing accomplishment for me. Just a single 50-second song can make an album function as a loop instead of a linear experience going from a Manic high to a Manic low. It can borderline single-handedly recontextualize both albums into something permanent. Digi is stuck oscillating in a sine wave between a Manic high and a Manic low. Her life isn't a dive from one state to the other, nor is there any progression that can be viewed as linear between the two, and I think this is what ultimately crystallizes the mood of the time period the Trial was trying to capture, a certain sense of volatility and structural instability derived from not being comfortable with positive changes. Ghosts and September Ballers. For a long time, Ghosts was definitely my favourite album from Trial. When I heard it for the first time, I didn't stop playing it on repeat for the entire day. However, as time passes, I like the album less than I used to. Not because it's worse or my taste has changed, but because it's the least dense and complex album Trial has made. This isn't inherently a bad thing. Not everything has to be the world over or the unknown tape. But those albums have a sense of longevity that can't really ever be exhausted. In comparison, if you listen to Ghosts enough, it'll be easy to get everything that's possible out of it. And that's really the only fault I have with the album. It's just not dense enough. It features a lot of the experimental beats and cryptic songwriting Trial has in their other albums, but it's pretty accessible. And that's not a bad thing. It's definitely still on the experimental side of music as a whole. It has a ton of meaningful lyrics. But the content of the album encapsulated two emotions, being stuck in winter and living a life that you always wanted to live. Except the life that Digi has always wanted to live has a lot of the same themes that come intuitively when it comes to music. Saying that you like drugs and love is nothing new. And in that sense, Digi even loses out to some other songwriters as she's approaching both with a certain sense of naivety. She isn't an expert in either, but has rather just started reveling in both at the same time. This makes the album relatively straightforward in comparison to the rest. This isn't something Digi has really intensely been thinking about for her entire life, but something new she's experiencing. And unlike Manic High, Manic Low, it lacks the same sort of wave pattern that allows the listener to completely reinterpret the album. The beats themselves are relatively toned down, which is a bit sad considering that Ghosts is the last album MC Shide has produced, and it's been almost 2 years since then. The instrumentals for every song are fantastic, and if I complained about them, I would be an idiot. But the creative voice of MC Chaidu just doesn't shine through in most songs the exact same way it did in Manic Low. However, with all of that said, this is still one of my favourite albums. Even though it has all of those flaws, I couldn't say that it's worse than either Emotional Anime Raps 2 or Manic High, Manic Low. Ultimately, I think it's relatively on par with both of those albums. But I do find myself returning to it less and less as time goes on, and additional listens no longer improve the album as they once did. And I can't just listen to it on repeat for many, many hours at a time. This leaves me conflicted. The very thing that made the album so impactful for me when I found it is a thing that has made it age less and less well than the rest of Trial. It was more accessible, it has more of the pop sensibilities that Trial usually completely lacks, and it did talk about the topics I needed to hear about. And as fun as it may sound, the album did kind of sell me on the concept of sex and romance to a certain extent, so I couldn't ever hate it given that it's changed a part of the way I see the world. I'm very good at isolating myself, and both sex and love have kinda sucked in the past, but all of that could change in the future. I'm left to wonder if there could be an album that does both. An album which can be easily listenable on repeat for days at a time, but an album that never depreciates or wears out. The only things that come to mind at this point are the classics of the classics. This just leaves me thinking about what an accomplishment it is to create an album that can do either of these things, and ultimately, it fills me with hope. I know if Digi wanted to and could focus on it, she might be able to create a truly classic album. Sure, it might not spread, and it might only be something that hipsters who revel in their own autism can appreciate, and it's likely it will only have an effect on a few dozen people. But then I would be one of those people, and it would change my world. Until that point, I just need to give Ghosts yet another spin on another day, fearing that such a day will come when I can only listen to the album as a piece of nostalgia, when sparse listens are carried by how I used to feel about it. But even when that day comes, it will probably still be one of my favourite albums. I've gone on about my own feelings for long enough. It's time to give Ghosts another spin and break down why exactly it had the effect on me that it did. Ghosts of Midwinter Ballers. The album starts with Trailer. This really isn't much of an independent song, and mostly just serves as an intro to the rest of the album. However, it is one of the more impressive displays of how well MC Shido can produce. The beat itself is fantastic, and being interlaced with clips of the thing creates a perfect winter atmosphere from the first few seconds. And even though it's not the most original way to produce an intro, it still works. The actual message of the song just describes a new lifestyle Digi is living with her girlfriend. It's no longer an oscillating pattern of many guys and many clothes, but a somewhat sublime, calm experience. They're stuck in their snowed-in house, smoking weed, and telling other people what they're feeling. This is where another theme is introduced that will play a large part of future music. Digi is getting better. The artifice of the previous changes in attitude has been washed away, and an entirely new paradigm of feelings has emerged. Not because they're brought on by intentionally creating scenarios where she can think herself into trying to feel differently, but because she has finally found something that can organically cure her of a lot of feelings she had before. But even though her life has been improved, she's still trying to improve the lives of others. Now that she has ground to stand on, she has to focus on making sure that everyone else can also build their own lives. She stayed true to herself and eventually worked everything out. The most important concern is that other people like her can follow her path and get to a point where they too can live life fulfilled. More than that, the song sets up Digi as an example for others. Not to imitate, but to analyze, so they can reconstruct their own lives according to the pattern she set. There's no guide to living a life if you're a similar person to Digi, but she herself is the one that can build something like that for others. Instead of just being someone who's a threatening, violent outsider, Digi can truly present herself as being an exemplary person in relation to people who are also stuck on the fringes. And when we transition to On That Back, Digi is again presenting herself as a filthy person here, which has become the common way to represent her personality throughout the music. However, instead of being a serious consideration in this song, it's more clearly an exaggeration without much substance behind it. Even though the persona has the same characteristics, the song is not extrapolating the persona from the actual feelings Digi has towards herself. It's more like the persona has already been established, but now the overly sexual aspects of it can be properly expressed, while the parts that are supposed to make it disgusting can be humorous. The point is no longer that someone as close as Digi could be desirable and highly sexualized, but rather that someone as sexual as her can retain the disgusting image of what she had previously established. And although the themes might be ultimately unnecessary when it comes to the aesthetic of the album, I feel like it's a nice conclusion to the previous established canon of songs that revolved around Digi being represented as a monster. But there is still a lot more depth to gather from this song, but none of it contributes to any storylines we can observe in the progression of albums. If she had ever finished the rap metal album she wanted to make, I could have commented on how she was referencing that here. I could point out the way that now she presents herself as a person who can annoy others by existing, while in previous songs she has always presented herself as a victimized outcast, which in turn makes her a lot more confident in her existence, but this doesn't really come up that much in the future. But since I want to tell a narrative and not just throw out every possible thread in every song, a lot of the meaning will always get lost. And as much as I would want to go over things like this when it comes to every song, and as much as I would want to point out every clever wordplay and how the songs end up self-referencing, that would just go counter to the art I'm making. Things like this is why everyone should listen to Trial for themselves, not just to hear the songs out, but to give them a very good in-depth consideration. The next verse transitions into another tangent on her feelings about the negative feedback she's receiving. Her fans seemingly want her to be unhappy, so she would cater more to creating the things that they want to see. She's built the life she has always wanted for herself, and she would never give that up to please anyone else. And while my overall perspective on lines about the haters has been fairly dismissive before, this is the first time where I feel like the perspective given is a fairly clear-minded and rational one. Digi finally manages to present herself as confidently responding to critics. And while previous songs went over how she is emotionally affected and how she has to struggle to stay true to herself, that sort of authenticity has become a given. She's no longer having to worry that her lifestyle is the right choice, because she has accomplished everything that she wanted with it. She's already been proven right, and everyone who disputed her has been proven wrong. And yet people still have the gall to criticize her for not catering to them in particular. So even though a lot of the responses to critics in Trial's music before seem fairly weak, considering how obvious it is that Digi is seriously affected by people's opinions, and thus seems defensive, here there's nothing to be defensive about. She was right, and they were wrong. The last verse on That Back is one of my favourites in the entire discography of Trial, but not in a way that can be described. Here, Digi just goes over her sex life and describes how good and considerate she is while fucking. I don't think there's any potential way for me to explain what makes it so pleasing to listen to, so I can't really analyse it. Furthermore, there's no real meta text to it. Everything that Digi is saying is out in plain sight and completely direct. It would be easier and more accurate to just paste in the lyrics themselves. But overall, this verse has genuinely changed the way I see the world. I haven't really liked sex in the past, but somehow this single verse is able to give me a perspective of someone who thinks like me, and how they can be truly sexual beings. So instead of having to follow normie concepts about why sex is good, I can appreciate someone with a completely different perspective that comes from a similar thought process. The unanalyzable music continues with "Weed hit the spot when you're rockin' on my thing, baby," which is just that line repeated over and over again, over a manic beat. Digi fucks while smoking weed. It does encapsulate the rest of the album, but it doesn't really offer anything to interpret. But in classic Trial fashion, it is the perfect track to listen to after On That Back and before Sieve Part 2. This album, like every other Trial album, is very well set. Sieve Part 2 is obviously a follow-up to Sieve, so instead of just analysing it on its own, you have to consider the first song and contrast it. But first, we should interpret the song on its own so that we can properly compare it. The song starts off with some heavy sieving. Digi doesn't like anyone and thinks everyone has a vast multitude of flaws. She's tired of being hated whenever someone hunts to create fake drama. Digi wants to be able to do what she has to do and act like she has to act. She's looking out for herself, and she's prepared to face the criticism that she will accrue by being herself. She has changed as a person due to being in a relationship. She's more creative and motivated than she has ever been, and promises to keep making good things. The song is a very fitting follow-up to Sieve. Both of them have the same themes and were created during similar phases in her life. Except the first time, her confidence was just a facsimile built to prop herself up, but now she's sieving even after finding a more true sense of happiness. And while in Sieve, Digi was talking about how she wanted someone to connect to, in Part 2 she has found someone. So instead of sieving about how the people who want her to be happy aren't willing to help her, she's sieving at the people who want her to compromise her vision when she's already happy. But not everything has gotten better. She's no longer simply misunderstood. People want to misunderstand her, just to get into fights. And instead of keeping a lot of her thoughts to herself as a form of self-defense, she's willing to put everything about herself out in the world and deal with the repercussions. Digi has become more open about herself, which is predictable inside the negative reaction from people who are not willing to handle her. But overall, the thing stopping her before was a general lack of acceptance, so she had to alter the way she acted to match what was expected of her. However, now that she doesn't need any more acceptance than she already has, she does not have to act in any way that anyone else prescribes. Her mental well-being is not compromised by being seen as a deranged person. Instead of sieving being a fundamental part of Digi, it has become an unfortunate part of being alive. Instead of being someone who sieves, Digi needs to distract herself from sieving by focusing on her own life. Fundamentally, Sieve Part 2 is also a follow-up to Habitual, where Digi was announcing that she wants to unleash herself and create a life where other people have to bear the force of her personality. So in a way, those two songs also form somewhat of a continuity, as people have been unable to deal with how Digi acts when she is true to herself. Y'all Ain't Seen Nothing is similarly titled Manic High, Manic Low, but carries on the themes established at the end of Human Connections and in Way Up. However, wherein the life Digi was living was embellished and glorified in those two songs, this is a celebration of humanity. So even though the message is similar, The listener is not intimately aware of the life Digi has and how much it affects her. The delivery is much more comfortable and experienced. She still has a comfortable life and a great relationship with her fiancé, although mentioning her engagement before the end of the album breaks continuity, considering how "I wanna wake up with you for the rest of my life" would have otherwise been a perfect conclusion and created a linear series of events throughout the album. However, the narrative cohesion isn't shattered or anything because of it. The album is still building up to the last song. It's just a slight compromise that has to be made. Most of Y'all Ain't Seen Nothing is just a collection of anecdotes about sex and drugs. Digi and her fiancé spent their time getting high and listening to music together. Digi finally feels comfortable being with someone that she can have a similar mindset to. And at the end of the song, she states that a collection of these stories is supposed to incite the listener to find themselves a similar life to what she is already living, and states that the listener needs to deeply evaluate everything that she has been saying. The song concludes with her reassuring the listener that she has only gotten even more creative and productive. The one line that really speaks to me in the song is this: "Life is just a spiral, but not outward, it's cylindrical." It's another one of the trial metaphors that somehow really gets to me, similar to the ballad box one, and even though I'm not going to try to break the subtleties of it down as far as I can, I think it's worth pointing out. It's very hard to encapsulate how life can constantly change, but that the change does not necessarily have to be single-directional. So even though the way that life goes is always moving in one direction, that direction can't be accurately compared in scope to any previous points in life. What matters is that things are constantly moving forward and creating something that eventually ends up as a sum total of an individual life. Overall, I just think this is a very beautiful line. Coyote Howling in the Forest is another song that aims to capture a specific moment. The first verse is a fairly straightforward description of being stuck in a relatively unfamiliar place during a cold, dark winter. The second verse takes that to the extreme, introducing supernatural elements that can be more threatening than any anxieties caused by hearing coyotes. The song concludes with Digi returning home. There are multiple levels to this song. First, there's a relatively literal interpretation that's just Digi going over an event that happened while she had multiple anxious thoughts due to having the porch light go out while moving a trash can. This is probably a safe interpretation given that the song itself does not really make any deeper connections to it. Then, it can also be interpreted as the culmination of everything that Digi had been complaining about when it comes to having to deal with winter in a cold climate. The previous songs had already made reference to how going outside was not an option in the winter, so this song can be taken as just the end result of all of those thoughts. It's neither about coyotes or figurative anxieties, but rather just not wanting to be in the north during the winter. And finally, it can be seen as a biographical song. The coyotes and monsters are neither a real event, Digi's anxieties, or a general disdain for northern winter. Instead, these are all the people who she feels threatened by. Although this is only evidenced by the last 3 lines of the second verse, I think it could be a compelling interpretation. It could describe how Digi feels when she has to exist in a world full of people she hates. She's threatened by people who act like animals and demons, people who aren't really human inside. She's working on herself so she can properly combat the people who have made the entire world into an inhospitable place for Digi. So the song combines that with a literalistic picture to properly connect multiple themes. Tough of putting the surfboard in the attic and getting out the snowboard is a really long name for a song. When a lot of Kane tells about Digi's plan to leave Virginia Beach and see more of the world, this is the song that tells the story of how that went and reflects back on what life was like back in Virginia. It took me way too long to figure out the title was just a fairly obvious way of describing moving from a southern coast to a northern snow. The first verse goes over everything that we have already been over in this book. Digi could not stay stable in any place, so she had to start moving around. And even though she had a great life back home and thought that she had achieved everything she wanted, she couldn't be happy with that. So she started moving and living in the moment for a bit, but immediately found someone she wanted to spend her life with. And now she has found a place where she can reflect back on everything that has happened in the past. Here's where we should get into what Trial of the Golden Witch is. Despite me only telling the story that has been going on since Bedrock, Trial of the Golden Witch has been around for far longer than that. It started out as Digi's project for making improv and other simple music, but soon became Digi's experimental music project. Eventually, most of these experiments morphed into hip-hop, and when her brother MC Shido started making music, it evolved into what we have known up until now. Since Bedrock and until Ghosts, most of the beats in every album have been made by MC Shido. The exceptions are emotional anime raps and a lot of Gay and Dead. A lot of people worked on Gay and Dead, but MC Shido was still fairly heavily involved. However, in Tough of, Digi talks about the music she made before the trial that I have been talking about. She was just making improvised music with her friends for a long time, and none of that music was popular in any sense. But Digi still listens to it and thinks back to what she had built back home. But none of the people involved carried over the work on the future project for Trial of the Golden Witch. They moved on and away from Digi's life to just live in a way they want. This was also referenced back in Human Connections, although in a much more passing and universal way. So in this song, Digi is talking about how moving away from home was good because she found the person she wants to spend her life with. But she still thinks back to her life in Virginia and everything she went through. There were a lot of things that she liked, but she just had to go. And now everyone she used to respect and make music with has other things to do. She doesn't think they're worse people because of it, but she wants more people to make art. Ghosts concludes with I wanna wake up with you for the rest of my life. This is a relatively straightforward song about love. Digi has had her life change by being with her fiancé and enjoys every form of intimacy they experience. She recounts the story of how they met online through their similar personalities and interests, and now that they have moved on from Snapchat to living a life together, they spend it how they want, which mostly comes down to sex and smoking weed. The second verse just goes over Digi proposing in an incredibly tasteful and pleasant way. It's just a romantic song about two people deeply in love, and it doesn't have to be anything more. This makes the album itself into a story of how they got engaged, since this is what the album ends on, and every song up until now has built up to the conclusion. It also pairs really well with Bedrock, as listening to those two albums back to back tells an incredibly simplistic story that encapsulates the story of Digi incredibly well. Even though the twists, turns, and nuances of everything that went down between those two albums are lacking, the great division of Ghosts is still relatively comparable to Bedrock. Both albums just tell the story of how Digi lives her life and are full of stories about specific events that try to show what she's doing and how she's living. And when Bedrock ends with a sense of hoping to reach something better, Ghosts delivers on that. Sure, it's much more true to go through the process of failing in About Earth, Haunted, and the shifting mindset that made Ghosts possible in Gay and Dead, but the story itself doesn't need that setback to be cohesive. This is why I would really want a further worthy biographical album from Trial, just so I can have a biographical trilogy. And although Manic Low fits this category, I would discount it for being a shorter album and more conceptual than either of the other ones. Thinking about it, it's less that I want the third biographical album, but more that I'm hoping that Trial continues to make music for long enough that one can be made. Time travel, time again. Oh wow, what? Me from the future has an entire chapter in the middle of the book? How does that happen? Anyway, I was a fool in the last paragraph of my Ghosts analysis. How I Distract Myself is the third autobiographical album, and it's good. It's nothing like the first two, but it still makes sense to listen to all three in a row and creates a pretty good trilogy. I blame this entirely on Digi underselling How I Distract Myself as just being an album of dumb experiments. Furthermore, I know that well laid and well paid has been a concept for a long time, and if that ever gets made, it will almost certainly displace How I Distract Myself as a true continuation of the story. This is because How I Distract Myself basically just tells the same story that Ghosts does, just a year later when Digi was way more tired. Anyway, moving on with the actual analysis. Emotional Anime Raps 2. Since I've already talked about how Emotional Anime Raps 2 perfectly follows Emotional Anime Raps, I'm not going to go over it again. Faith in Humanity is the best follow-up to Mono no Aware and delivers on the mood the first album establishes. Emo Raps 2 also concludes a trilogy of my three favorite Trial albums that started with Manic Low, and I would consider this to be my favorite block of Trial music. While it's true that chronologically the next Trial album would be done on tape, I don't think the chronology here is very important, given that they were only released a few days apart. In September of 2018, Digi managed to finish 3 albums that she had been working on in rapid succession, so they came out relatively close to each other. So although chronologically they would create their own block of music, I feel like Emotional Anime Raps 2 fits in together with Ghosts and Manic Low far more than the other 2 that were released near it. Emotional Anime Raps 2 also follows the first Emotional Anime Raps, insofar as it is a philosophical album. Instead of trying to accomplish any narrative or other goal, it mostly just tries to express what Digi is thinking about and how she feels about everything. In this way, I think it doesn't fit into the continuity of her own life story perfectly, but it still expresses the subtext in the previous 2 albums very overtly. performing a similar role that emo raps had in relation to Above the Roof Haunted and Bedrock. It's actually really fascinating how Manic, Low, Ghosts, and emo raps 2 form a similar triad to Bedrock, Above the Roof, and emo raps 1. In a way, I think this is indicative of the way that Digi creates music. She wanted to create personal albums at very different points in life, so she created a short album when she wasn't completely sure what she was feeling, and a long album after she had completely grasped the way that she was living at that point. Then, she also released an album that was an in-depth analysis of what she was feeling. Obviously, events and the order they're documented in are relatively different, but there is a comparison, especially considering that both of these blocks were followed up by her 2 attempts to make long albums centered around concept, those being Gay and Dead and The World Over. There are various experiments and diversions sprinkled in, especially considering how much music she makes and never releases in album form. However, this pattern is something I wouldn't mind listening to again, and if Emotional Anime Raps 3 ever comes out for some reason, I won't view it as completely creatively bankrupt, even though it probably would be. But the most important thing to talk about is how I relate to this album. Whenever I get sad, I just throw on emo raps too. It has affected me more than any other trial album. No matter how much Ghosts made me rethink the way I approach romance and how much I can relate to pre-Manic, Low discography, none of them have anywhere as powerful of an impact as emo raps 2 does. It's become a natural reaction to just put on the album whenever I feel myself slipping into the worst kind of depression. And it's not like it fixes sad emotions. It's not an album so brutally uplifting that it can just make me happy, not like such a thing would even be healthy if it existed. Rather, emo raps 2 just makes me accept my sadness. Even when I hate the world and hate myself, I can just listen to these 5 songs that have been expertly crafted to express a mature version of the things I feel. To some extent, it feels like getting in touch with how I could feel and how I can just move past my current struggles, but the album also embraces those problems. And unlike emo raps 1, the album doesn't become white noise by expressing emotions that are relatively obvious to me. Instead, it helps me discover emotions I never even realized I was feeling. And while the album does stumble at points and it has flaws, it's not really worth worrying about the flaws. What matters for a quality product is how much it can impact someone, and emo raps 2 definitely can. If I was the sort of person to rate media based on their flaws, I could tear into emo raps 2 for days on end, but that's ultimately pointless. Sure, the second and third songs do drag out and get somewhat repetitive. Sure, the fourth and fifth songs are a bit useless, but all of it is still incredibly powerful. When listened out of sequence, Smoking Gun and Blue Mayo barely have any value, but coming off of Sad Boy Anthem, they're exactly the songs I want to hear. They might not be the best, but they have the kind of levity that you need after being confronted with the condensed emotions of depression and instructions on how to leave it. And even though these songs lack a lot of meaning and are relatively uncharacteristic in that regard, you don't need any more meaning after the first 10 minutes of the album. The only track that I couldn't complain about if I tried is Faith in Humanity. For me, everything about that song is nearly perfect. I would need to contort my entire being just so I could complain about this song. Not only does the song have one of the best songwriting by Digi, endless chess features on half a song with even better lyrics. In some way, this makes me think about what Trial of the Golden Witch is, because it's easy to get lost in the idea that it's just Digi making the music she wants to make. And while this is true, it wouldn't be nearly as good without the features. And although Digi has self-produced many singles that can easily live up to the other producers she has had on her work, Trial can't just be narrowed down to one mission. Some of my favourite Trial songs and verses are ones with endless chess features, but I'm not really a fan of anything Jesse has done on his own. The only one of his songs that I have heard and immensely liked is Lunatic. And even that can't beat how much I like his features on Trial songs. So it's not just that other people enhance Digi's creative vision in Trial project, but it's also that Trial projects enhance how good other people's music is. Even on emo raps 2, despite the tracks having been produced for completely unrelated anime, the way that they have been repurposed for the songs gives them an entirely new dimension. Same as in Manic, Low. The songs are written in such a way that they perfectly conflict and contrast with the music they use. The music warps the lyrics as much as the lyrics warp the music. It's a beautiful dance and hard to get right, but it feels like something about it is just perfectly right. And now thinking more about this, it could have been the most major failure of the world over. The lyrics don't seem to offend the music at all. So even though the music was never made to be rapped over, and especially not made for a weird concept album, it dovetails so well with the lyrics that it seems too right. This in turn makes that album feel relatively hollow, because in some aspects it feels like the instrumentals don't really add much to the lyrics, but more on that when we get to that album. So overall, Trial as a project seems to have kept its roots as a group effort. It might be headed by Digi, and she might be at the helm of everything that's going on, but it's not just her own vision. Her own vision is something far more like the singles she has self-produced, Pre-Inter and the Unknown tape. And I'm sure if she was making her own music under her own name all the time, that would be the way that she would make most of her music. I've talked enough about some metaphysical creative spirit that surrounds Trial, so we should get back to the actual songs. The first verse of Faith in Humanity recounts Digi's own struggle with trying to live in a society alongside other people. It's not just that she herself is the locus of every problem she has anymore. She has been wronged by the people she has been surrounded by, and no one has ever bothered to apologize for it. She hasn't had the chance to make her peace with the people who have tried to force her to live a false life. And although she has now reached a life where she can live the way she wants to live, she recognizes that she achieved it by going against society. She has seen the people surrounding her struggle even more and never even reach the same degree of success with the same consistency that she has. So even while her own struggles aren't anywhere close to the effect that society has had on the people she cares about, she still had to deal with immense amounts of pain to the point of having contemplated suicide in the past. This is the first time I really have to bring in Trial deep lore to properly explain a song, because there is a seeming contradiction in the narrative. While in the early records we explored, Digi was full of a determination to live and couldn't accept death to a fear of missing out on basic experiences. It wasn't like this has been the rule. Going back to earlier Trial records, my personal favorite being Drape on Mere Veil of Cynicism, dealing with depression and suicidal feelings is nothing new. So even though it desensitized myself to thoughts I would die is a really weird lyric when contrasted to Immortal, Heat Death and Quarter, this type of heavy depression isn't completely unprecedented. And this makes sense. Better and Bedrock wasn't actually made during the time when Digi was in her true Better and Bedrock, but rather after that had already passed. And Emo Raps 2 can take a more retrospective look back to that time, given that Digi has had more time to think about everything that she has been through. The chorus is pretty self-explanatory. Digi already realizes how destructive her mindset can be, so she doesn't need anyone to just add to that strain. But she has managed to start wanting to change the world. It's not as if she's trying to create something inherently utopian, she's just asking for basic empathy. However, the current state of the world makes it a radical thing to ask for. The second verse draws parallels between the way Digi was discriminated against in school and the way that nothing has really changed growing up. Instead of being mistreated for being weird, people are inventing lies about her to try to destroy the life she created. The verse goes on to bring in one more way that Digi has changed. Instead of seeing herself as a part of a large group of people, she's accepted a dualistic existence with her fiancé. This verse further explains the first verse by showing her motivation behind creating a song like that. She states plainly that she's telling the story to avoid other people having to feel the same thing. This brings a theme that was established in Emo Raps 1 to completion. The past isn't something to be avoided, but rather something to be learned from. And even though no one should have to go through the experiences Digi has gone through, she sees the value in being able to talk about them. Her verses end with a definitive mission statement. The way to make the world work is by everyone being empathetic, rational, and true to themselves. And after that ends, we get one more chorus before we get to Jesse's part of the song. And while I really love Digi's raps here, Jesse outdid himself dramatically. While Digi has a message that combines a life-affirming theme with a hatred of humanity, Jesse takes on the same meaning with a much darker tone. His life isn't even affirmed. The contrast arises from the fact that Digi has managed to get the life she has always wanted, but Jesse is still stuck in the same situation he has been for a long time. And while there's always a lot to analyze when Digi raps, Jesse just gives us raw human emotion. I'm not even going to bother trying to rationalize anything he says, because it's just so much better to listen to a song. While Digi likes breaking complex ideas down to even more complex metaphors and very tangible ways of conveying ideas, Jesse doesn't do that. Even though Jesse is very good with words, and sometimes is lyrically impressive even above what Digi manages to accomplish, there is no obfuscation at play. Everything is straightforward and raw. The most complex allegory here is him describing his freedom as being turned into a bird, but this isn't a bad thing, especially when contrasted against everything Digi does stylistically. Being hit with a burst of such sheer rage after a tangled web of contradicting messages is refreshing. The delivery is incredibly authentic. The purity of emotion it has is so expertly weaved in the well-practiced flows that it sounds effortless. This is only enhanced by the somewhat low quality of his microphone. The tone that the microphone gives Jesse's voice also layers perfectly between the lows of the beat and the highs of the melody. Every time I listen to these verses, I can't help but scream along to Jesse. And while my hatred of the world and my alienation will never be this pure, I like being able to pretend that it is. Especially when I already feel depressed. Going from the tempered hatred of Digi to the raw rage of Jesse helps me not feel bad about having them. Because I don't really like being angry, and I don't like how sad I can get. Being able to surmount them alongside people who understand exactly what I'm going through is only ever a good thing. And even when this relationship is parasocial at best, this is the relationship humans have always tried to create with music. And for me, I'm just so unable to relate to music that the only music to give me this feeling is trial. Even when I have heard songs talking about the exact feelings I have, there's always been a layer of not being able to connect with the song, but that's not present here. Even other outsider art doesn't connect with me on this level. There are some songs that I think have managed to come close to making me relate at all, but no other artist has consistently produced music that I can consistently feel close to. And in that way, this is the goal of Trial, the aforementioned metaphysical spirit the project has. It's created so weird autistics and music to listen to that's made by other weird autistics. And even though egotistically this is what I want more of, it's also the thing that makes it unlikely to ever reach mainstream success. It's not music that can be appreciated on a shallow level, and it's outsider art to its fullest. Nothing about it appeals to mainstream sensibilities, and if it did, it wouldn't appeal to the type of people that it currently can uniquely appeal to. And even in Faith in Humanity, I haven't gone over the entirety of the complexity. I couldn't begin to discuss the vocal samples and how they relate to the rest of the song. I'm sure there's some context I'm missing that inspired it, maybe an interview some that Digi did where she got dismissed and mischaracterized, but I'm not sure. If this passage is included in the final draft of the book, it means that I didn't look hard enough because I don't want to understand the song fully. However, the tone in those samples only reinforces a seething feeling in me. More time travel is needed here. I never found out what a sample is, but I have come to understand it differently. It no longer makes me seethe more, but rather calms me down between the verses. The sample is about someone wanting the world to understand that they're a decent person, and I think that's probably where Digi was going with that. I'm still not sure, and I don't know if I will ever be. And usually, Trial would here provide a counterbalance to the hatred. In a normal album, Sad Boy Anthem would follow Faith in Humanity. But Digi knew better. Instead of falling into the trap of arranging the album in the most pleasant way, she followed up Faith in Humanity with When They Cry. The previous feelings created by the first song aren't nicely dismissed, but encouraged and doubled down on with When They Cry. It's no longer just that you hate humanity, but now you have an avenue to feel joy in their suffering. I think this is the decision that makes the album so brilliant. It's a very abrasive listening experience, in the way that it's not laid out like most other Trial albums. There's no nice curve of feelings being created and resolved, just 3 songs in a row that will make you feel hate for the people who made you feel sad in the first place, and then 2 more songs to nicely let you off the manic energy and let you leave the album with any sense of relief. This does create the feeling like the album is too heavy when listened to in sequence. Every time I listen to it, I want to close it in the middle of Sad Boy Anthem, but I know that the impending emotional catharsis would make it worth it. Listenability and arrangement has been completely exchanged for sheer emotional impact in the way it plays out in practice. While Trial has some of the best album setting most of the time, this just beats every other album by going above and beyond what was expected of it. So what's so oppressive about When They Cry? On a relatively surface level, it seems like a song that's more uplifting than anything else. However, what balances it out thematically is the fact that as the song goes on, Digi becomes more vindictive with how she expresses her opinions about the people who she feels repressed by. She starts the song as being susceptible to other people's emotions to an extent that she stalls her own life, and ends the song by reveling the misery felt by those people. The titular Faye mostly refers to people online who have been attacking Digi, but likely also includes the social elements she feels are repressing her in general. The first 2 verses of the song recount the life Digi has lived up to this point. It would be very interesting to reconstruct her entire journey as a person from Tees, but you have already done that in depth with this very book. So if you listen to the song after reading everything included here, you already know what it's about. But in the first verse, Digi describes the state that she finds herself in at the point of the song. She's outwardly focused, since she has already in large part figured her life out. She's unhappy with people and the world in general, but she knows that there are good people out there that she can help. And at this point, it doesn't matter what anyone in the mainstream thinks or feels. The final verse just doubles down on this with more aggression when Digi assumes the big dick character. I'm frustrated at how any analysis of this song is just analysis of other songs in the trial catalogue, given how it recounts her life story and how she has grown as a person. Instead of lingering on it any longer, I'm just going to explain how it fits in the album. After listening to Faith in Humanity, the listener has already been exposed to the current state of how Digi and Jesse hate people. But When They Cry goes on to reinforce that by stating that the more you find happiness, the more the hate increases. It contrasts directly at the sentiment that people like Digi could ever fit in with society at large. There's no end point where we can be properly accepted unless we change ourselves as people. And if we can manage to sort our lives out, everything will seem even worse because we won't be able to just concentrate on our own feelings. And after this brutal message has sunk in, the album goes straight for sad boy anthem. And if the album itself can be conceived as a backwards journey throughout Digi's history, the present state where Digi can't stand anyone is established, how she got there is established, and now the album is about detailing the starting point of the journey that Digi went through. But this starting point isn't Digi, but rather someone else going through the exact same problems she went through represented through herself. In a way, it's an uplifting song. Even the most alienated people can find community and can get themselves to a point where they can be satisfied with their own life. But still tonally not about being uplifted, but about being stuck in a situation where you desperately need to be convinced that you can be uplifted at all. So when the album has already hit you with the songs about how the world is shit, and how getting better can make you see the world as even more shit, this one goes on to convince the listener to get better. And as someone who has been stuck in the exact circumstances detailed in the song, it's powerfully resonant, since it transports me back to the time where I felt the way described in it. Maybe if I still needed convincing that things can get better, it might make me feel better. But I don't need to feel better if I have emo raps too. I need to feel worse. I need to feel like when I was 14 and everything was hopeless. And that's the brilliance of the song for me. It can explain and consolidate feelings that have been festering for years. There's no way to properly square everything I was feeling years ago when I was as depressed as a human could possibly get, except if those feelings are first accepted and then resolved. And this is what the song reaches with its conclusion. Even if most of it is repressive, it concludes by providing a reasonable solution to everything by detailing how Digi found her solution. It's effective to the point where I can't talk about it without resorting to nearly incoherent rambling. There's no way to describe the way I feel when I listen to a song properly, and especially when I'm hearing it in the context of listening to the entire album. There are no words to properly describe the feeling of slowly sending away emotional issues that have sat for longer than I can remember at this point, and that have never been properly resolved. This is especially important because the song is one of the most straightforward lyrically the Trial has made. There aren't really any complex themes that have to be decrypted. Everything in the song is relatively literal. This might be why it resonated with me so hard even the first time I listened to it. I didn't need to comb over it to try to understand what it was about. It's just stated in its lyrics. Although this means that over time, I have grown to like the other songs way more, and this one has stagnated because I can't keep discovering new levels to this particular one. But I still wouldn't make it more complex. Having a good balance between incredibly complex lines that need to be carefully combed through and powerful emotional statements has helped me get deeper into Trial. I never got into appreciating the Unknown tape if I hadn't heard Ghosts, but more on that later. The album concludes with what amounts to filler, but necessary filler. After the drastic repressiveness that persisted until the last part of Sad Boy Anthem gave us some hope, the rest of the album should only work to bring us up from the low. So the next song is Smoking Gun, which is just about sex and weed. And after Smoking Gun, Pleo Maya details some more positive ways that Digi has experienced her life. Even when the world is holding her down, she has had her family and now has her fiancé. She has been helped by various peers and fans alike, and only wants to keep getting further ahead in life. But not in a way that sacrifices anything she wants to be, since she knows that she can keep true to herself and not slow down because of it. The rest of the song is a complex network of various ideas that can be roughly broken down by the sequence they're introduced in. The first idea is that Digi can't stop her ambition. The second idea is that anyone who tries to do anything about it can't affect her anymore. Then she reassures the listener that the choices she makes are all calculated and she's living the best life possible. After that, the song transitions into telling the listener that they too could have a similar life if they only make enough mistakes to learn from. It further instructs everyone to live a life where they can be as true to themselves as possible and not conform, using the background of her own success as something that could be a template for other people. After that, the song just evolves into detailing the effects that a passionate person can have, using overblown metaphors. Circling back to the themes of family, Digi then expresses how she wants to start her own, and lays out what amounts to a manifesto addressed to her future children. I could analyse how she plans to raise her children too, but I think some things are a bit too meaningful to break down into rational terms. Everything should be analysed, but not all analysis should be shared. Everyone can listen to the song, and it's not like it's hard to get everything being said in the last verse either. And that's it for emo raps too. A journey that tries to get the listener to understand the emotional turmoil that comes from knowing that the more you have hope in your future, the more you hate everyone who wants to fuck with you. And even though the last two songs aren't dense compilations of depressive themes, they do help the listener find the hope that they need to hate people even more. It's incredibly calming that the album makes no attempt to get the listener into anything resembling a positive headspace, and that's what makes it so effective whenever I feel depressed. I don't think I can concisely explain it. I could barely even explain it in elaborate terms. I barely even know how I feel about it. The Fuckoff Mixtape Intermission. Before I get to the Unknown tape, which has already been set up as the climax of the book, I need to go over Fuckoff Mixtape. And since I was already running out of analysis when it comes to the last album, this one won't be a very in-depth look because it finds itself situated in a weird corner between two very meaningful albums. It includes a lot of songs that have a lot of value that can be deeply analysed, but lacks a coherent theme and isn't really a part of the general story I'm trying to tell. As its name implies, it's not an actual album that's created as one piece of art. It's a collection of various songs Digi has made over time. But even though it doesn't really fit into a comprehensive view of Trial of the Golden Witch, it's not just a random album that can be totally dismissed. The song quality in it is incredibly high, and most songs can be listened to perfectly well as singles. And even though it can't really be seen as a proper album, the way the songs are arranged does give it some more value than it otherwise would have had. But that doesn't mean the structure isn't very loose in comparison to other projects, they're just albums. There's definitely a progression, but most of the songs in the album can be enjoyed on their own almost as much as they can be enjoyed in sequence. But this is not necessarily a slant against the album. The individual songs on here are all great on their own, and this is what ultimately distinguishes Fuckoff Mixtape from albums like This Ain't It Chief and How I Distract Myself. While those two albums are good and underrated, they aren't anywhere near Trial's best work. They have their moments, but overall they aren't really up there with the great projects. Fuckoff Mixtape doesn't have the problem. There are no low points on the album. But even so, I'm not going to give it a complete full analysis, because it doesn't really warrant one. It's a great supplement to the story, but it's not really a part of it in the same way that the rest of the albums are. Except for Lane Switch, which also happens to be the first song on the album. Even though a lot of what Trial makes is deeply introspective, the albums we have gone over aren't ever overtly depressive. Even the themes explored are deeply depressed, they're accompanied by a certain degree of bravado or brevity. This isn't true in Lane Switch, which is just Digi reflecting on herself as a broken person. The song starts by detailing how Digi wants to showcase obscure art to the world. The next verse goes on to almost be the usual Trial narrative of how staying yourself is always the best choice, but quickly pivots into questioning that supposition. It's no longer about being yourself, but thinking about whether you're even a good person to be. The song itself is symbolic of the advancing relationship Digi has with her audience. It's a deeply introspective song with no illusions and nothing overblown about it. But in the same breath, it's a song about whether Digi should even express her introspection. She recognizes herself as an imperfect person, and she doesn't know whether she should let others see how vulnerable she actually is, or whether she should keep up the illusion of herself as someone greater than who Digi actually is. It goes on to detail the same events that we already explored in emotional anime raps too, but with even more honesty. Digi has always felt repressed by the society around her by nature, but she has somewhat gotten past what she used to be. She wants to maintain who she is right now, and not regress into someone who she doesn't even like. But she's already been humbled by coming into contact with the real world as it is, which has caused her to greatly adjust her expectations of how things are and how they should be. And now she doesn't want to do anything other than just work on her own life and the things she cares about, but she's unsure of whether or not that will even be possible. This ties thematically back into the start of the song, where Digi talked about wanting to promote other artists. She's still one of the people who is struggling with living via their own art, and she doesn't have her life together anywhere near as much as she would like other people to believe. But the emptiness that she feels is contrasted with having a functional and loving relationship that she can fall back on. So even though she's not completely at the bottom of her life, the only thing that has really changed is now she can feel a true sense of love instead of mostly nothing. Her entire life is now revolving around a relationship with a person who feels a similar degree of discontent, so everything else feels even more mechanical. She's just not someone who can make a ton of money doing what she loves, but a person who is struggling to get by both due to internal and external factors. But she wants to maintain her lifestyle where she can afford necessities and entertainment, but not because she cares about the responsibility she has accrued, but entirely due to a hedonistic relationship with her surroundings. So even though she has influence that she can now use, as pointed out in the first verse, she just wants to focus on her own art and her own relationship. And this is where the kicker of the song comes in. Digi isn't someone who wants to live forever anymore, as previously detailed. Her obsession with dying was entirely caused by the fact that she had never gotten the ability to properly live. So now that she has been able to live the sort of life she wants to, she hasn't gotten more afraid of death. Instead, she has become completely able to accept the idea of death, to the point where she feels a degree of suicidal ideation in the digital lane switch. Tunneling elaborates on the discontent Digi feels with her work, as she doesn't think it's creatively satisfying in a way that she wants her work to be. Instead, it has to be watered down enough to suit the general audience. However, she recognizes that there are people who she wants to build a society with. The rest of the song is a loose description of a lifestyle entirely comprised of hedonistic pleasure and the rejection of society as it is right now. It concludes with the second moment of vulnerability on the album, where Digi talks about how she has overcome the fundamental pain that made her able to reach the point of life where she is right now. The progression is not very interesting by now, especially given that all of a sudden mostly kills the vibe built up before and pivots into a completely different story about Digi's success. It's still probably the best way the album could have been ordered, but it doesn't get enhanced by the previous song. Dick About My Bitch follows up on it perfectly, with agreeing that Digi gets even more mad at the internet, given that she can be having sex instead. Feel Me, Jin Kazama's Absolute Solitude, is a classic biographical song when it comes to trial. It just goes over events that have been happening to Digi and how her mom found her biological grandfather after a long time. Then the song goes on to detail how powerful she is as a person. The point of the song isn't really to make a lot of sense though, it's most likely just supposed to be fast, and there's only so much story that can be told. The song is still good, but I'm not the person to analyze it. It would take a bit of effort to decrypt all the anime video game references in it, but given that I'm not really the most interested in either, I'm not going to do that. However, there could be a lot of meaning that I just missed by not being familiar with the source material that's being referenced. The album pulls a great move after this song, though, by moving on to 10th dimensional Tai Mao. This isn't really a song that I want to analyze either. It's another one that's just full of anime references without that much actual substance. However, it perfectly fits the middle point of the album and leads from the first half to the second one, avoiding the interruption that happened if all of a sudden. Furthermore, Feel Me leads perfectly into it, and the drop from the super manic energy into the bare bones beat has a very good role in the album. The next three songs are all relatively unremarkable in their own right. Dust Force is just a song about Digi, her friends, and her wife, combined with a recognizable message that the way to succeed in life is to take control, be weird, and stay true to yourself. Who Killing Them is a song about XXXTentacion and his life. And Visions is just the usual rap trope of talking about how getting wealthier doesn't necessarily improve your happiness, which is a point that has already been explored all the way back in Bedrock with Waves at Dawn. But these three songs could very well be a mini-album due to how well they flow into each other. They have a cohesive aesthetic, and the sequencing terrain drastically improves how listenable they are and makes each one more impactful. The lyrics help, and they're all somewhat thematically connected, but it's more the specific ways the tone subtly shifts throughout all of them that makes for a satisfying progression. After that, the album goes into Edgelord Maximum Freestyle, which in concept would be a great palate cleanser, but it's a song I almost always skip due to its length, and given that it's a freestyle. There's nothing much to be read into when it comes to it, and you'll get everything you possibly could out of your first listen to it. After that, the album concludes with 3 songs that are arranged in a satisfying way to give a nice wind down. Drake fucking sucks and Boiling Guts are completely self-explanatory and don't really warrant discussion other than pointing out that they're sonically some of the best material Trial has, although their lyrical content is fairly lacking. For the first time, this is audiobook recording Toad's Might, and I just have to say that Drake fucking sucks is amazing because Drake does fucking suck. I just had not listened to enough Drake to know how much he fucking blows by the time I wrote this book. Sleeper's a change and delves back into the way more personal side of Trial, although it would be impossible for me to properly understand what it means without other context. It's incredibly specific in what it's trying to say. However, it doesn't explain exactly what its point is like most other Trial songs do. So even though it feels incredibly personal and conveys a large degree of targeted frustration, I can't really say much about it other than that it's a perfect closing track for an album. The Unknown Prelude. To quickly recap, I had known about the Unknown tape for a while, and I had been into Trial for a while. Every time I tried to listen to the album, I got put off by being completely unable to comprehend the lyrics in any of its songs. However, the more times I tried listening to it, the more gradually I started to get it. Even now, I'm not really qualified to say that I even like the album that much, or I can fully understand it, but it has started resonating. And getting to this point was a painful process. From the first time trying to listen to it in its entirety and being unable to focus on the visual side of the project, to the time I tried to listen to it again and again and again, never really getting on the same level that it wanted me to be on. It waited, cryptic, dense, and daunting beyond my grasp. But one day I just got it. Something within me clicked, and I started understanding the lyrics. I still didn't like it, but I had the potential to. Maybe it was how much Trial I was listening to, enough that I could distinguish digi-zone pitch from any convoluted instrumentation, no matter what the degree of separation was. Maybe I just tried enough that words started properly sticking out to me. I still didn't understand a lot of the lyrics on the album, but I didn't feel like I had to. But then the album clicked the second time. I was probably on a train. Maybe I had just gotten off a train. I had my headphones on, and I decided to use my free time to give it another shot. And I got it. I got everything it was trying to do. I got why Digi says it's a super personal album and talks about everything that she feels in the most raw possible way. I got the mood of every song. I was just able to get into it. And even now that I'm into it, I don't listen to it that often. I guess I don't listen to Trial nearly as often as I used to when I started writing this book. It's still the default soundtrack to whatever I'm doing, but I don't get distracted for 3 hours just going through all of the albums again and again. Every album I talked about in this book gets a fair shot, and I listen to all of them when I want to. With all that being said, each song in the Unknown tape will get a very spotty analysis. This is partly because I can't make out everything said in them, but partly because of how much there is to analyze. There are the individual song artworks, the video associated with all of them, and even the song names that greatly impact the way I perceive them, that I had to figure out by decoding the information given in the album download. The Unknown tape is exactly as cryptic as it seems, if not more. Any speculation on it is almost entirely speculation and isn't necessarily right. But given that I like the album and want to talk about it, I should also analyze it. My analysis here is more subjective and personal than it was with all the other albums. It's no longer even an informed interpretation. The Unknown tape. The album begins with White Squall, which is just a collection of noise. To me, it's always been reminiscent of being stuck in a cave, surrounded by bugs, with the noise of their many legs amplified many times. With the Unknown tape, every song has 2 pieces of visual art associated with it. One is the image provided with the album for every song. The second is the video associated with the YouTube album. For White Squall, that image matches the song name. It's just a mess of black lines on a white background with a distinctive river shape running through the middle of it. In the video, the song is set to a video of a cloudy sky and trees moving in the wind. Trying to extrapolate a coherent meaning from this would be futile. We could look at the emoji used to represent the song, try to analyze the video, but ultimately the track itself is just noise to set up what's going to come up next. And it does so perfectly. Scroll back is where the album really starts. And since we have lyrics to analyze here, we will do that soon. But first I want to get everything else out of the way. The video associated with Scroll Back is just a loop of a cutscene in a Super Metroid game that is being manually rewinded. I didn't know which game, and I doubt it matters enough to research it. The artwork for the track and the album is a collection of various pillows and hands holding them. Both of these make sense in their own distinct levels. The song is about repetition. So while the video frames it through repeating a cutscene, the album art encapsulates the flow of time where details are the only thing to change. In this case, which pillowcase is in use. Although this might be a complete misinterpretation. I feel like I at least came close with the mood that these things were trying to create. Now for the lyrical analysis. Since there are no official lyrics for this song, I used help from the post Mr. Tangel made in the Digi Discord, where he transcribed a decent portion of the song. As with many trial songs, this has two large meanings. The first is the main part of the song, where every sentence is punctuated by scrollback or another word with a similar flow. This is a very distinctive flow in trial music, and I think both Dust Force and Feeler capture similar rhythm. This part just talks about how tired Digi has gotten of people telling her what they think she should do, given that they have no idea about what she even wants to do. This is familiar enough territory that I don't really feel the need to focus on it too much. The more interesting part of the song is the middle section with the fast flow. This is where Digi talks about how stuck she feels in her own mindset and life. Days go by without her even noticing that they do. The only thing she feels is being stuck in the same loop over and over again. It's not even a good loop to be stuck in. The only break from this loop is when she feels like the antipathy she feels towards the world and herself is reaching a breaking point where she just has to let it go and wait for the storm to leave. And with this repetition still ongoing, Digi feels incomplete, and I think ultimately this is the real meaning of the song. I think it pairs her own insecurity with the hate she feels towards people who criticize her for no reason. It's not that she is strong against criticism, and it's just something that annoys her, but rather it's something that she is prone to agree with. When faced with critics, she is primed to agree with the ways that they try to shut her down. This is not portrayed as a healthy mindset in the song, because it isn't. Digi feels the need to not only validate herself to others, but also reassure herself that she isn't what they make her out to be, because she can't be confident enough in herself to brush whatever comments others have about her off. This is something that has been split in previous albums, where there is a clear distinction between her reaction to critics and her own self-doubt, but I personally feel like Scrollback unifies them both in a beautiful way. In her opinion, she hasn't done anything to deserve the degree of unfair criticism she has gotten, and yet she has to suffer from it in the way she does. Everything people say about her fuels her innate self-doubt, and serves to make her suffer from herself even more. But this is something she isn't willing to deal with earnestly, so she plays it off as something she can respond to with an aggressive blowback when she's the one who is truly powerless against it. When it comes to how the album has been set thus far, the ambient sounds of White Skull had transitioned into the understated melodic rhythms of Scrollback. This has already primed the listener for a more melancholic journey through harnessing chaos. However, Hedgehog changes this by being a lot more distortion-based, following up on the more aggressive tone at the end of Scrollback. The visual art associated with Hedgehog is very minimal, so I won't include that in the analysis. The song starts with Digi talking about how she doesn't feel comfortable in whichever situation she is. She always feels like she should be somewhere else. She has felt this way for her entire life and is looking back at how she arrived where she is. But it's hard to do so because she has achieved relative success, so it feels like the struggle she has gone through were ultimately for the better. And even though it hurts to think this way, it's something that has been expressed in multiple other songs. Digi needs to learn how to forgive the world, because the only way she became the person that she is right now was through the hardships that the world put her through. But she still feels like she has been wronged by everything around her, and no one has bothered to make it right. She's torn between being true to herself and being mad at the people who made her the person she is. Her solution to the dilemma is retreating into the life she has made for herself and ignoring whatever the world expects of her. The song ends with Digi expressing how she wishes that people confronted her directly whenever they have problems with her. She then goes on to play up the machismo element that she often likes to retreat to whenever confronted with people who just want to be negative towards her and get a reaction out of her. The only way she can remain stalwart is by feeling as if she is powerful and in control. This verse too ends with her retreating back into her own life and coming back from the power fantasy she was expressing towards people who can't even look her in the eyes when they criticize her. Instead of engaging with it further, she just goes to experience her own life. The next song is probably about sex, maybe about asses. I can't make out the lyrics and there are no official lyrics. I can just draw a conjecture from the symbolism associated with it and the song being titled Fuck. Someone else could probably decipher it. That person isn't me. All I can say is that it and Dirge for Dead Friends are a welcome interlude between Hedgehog and Dynamite. I also can't make out anything said in Dirge for Dead Friends, so that one won't get a section either. Fuck delivers on the franticness of the previous song, and Dirge for Dear Friends brings the album back to a more restrained melancholy. There's probably something really deep that one of those songs has to say, and someone else could do a very decent analysis. I just know that they sound pretty nice, and help the album maintain a consistent pattern from one song to the next. Dynamite starts off as being about how Digi feels that her mental issues affect how she feels about herself. Neither her intellect or confidence can stand up to the creeping thoughts that make her doubt herself in every conceivable way. She needs to break out from an unhealthy way of viewing everything, but she finds herself unable to do so. The artwork associated with Dynamite plays into its main themes. The track artwork is very cautious seeming, and contrasts the way she has grown into the possibility of regressing back into herself. The one on the video album emphasizes how the conflict of the song is taking place in her own mind. She can't combat the way she feels anxious about herself, and the way her goals feel perpetually out of reach due to the fits of self-doubt she inevitably suffers. This is made even worse by finding out that human relationships are not always positive. She couldn't let go of her fiancé if she wanted to, but the relationship with her makes her question her own motives even more than before. She doesn't know whether she wants to make her happy, or whether she is just a conduit for her own prolonged selfishness. So the song advances with her talking about how she has been able to see the negative sides that every person has, and how she knows that her fiancé also has a tendency to retreat into an unhealthy mindset. But if she externalizes her anxiety about herself onto her, it will just make her own life worse. All Digi wants is to be able to think normally, and not feel like she constantly has to fight battles with herself to feel like a decent person. No One Here is another song that I could never have entirely deciphered myself. And even with the lyrics being available, I don't think I can. It's a song that gives me an isolating feeling. It's a song about how people are important and dangerous, and how everyone has to face the world alone, even if they're together. I don't really know what any of it means. All I know is that it exists, and I appreciate it for existing, and I feel like that's what the song is trying to be. Value Orgy and Scrollback have the most iconic videos associated with them on the YouTube album. Somehow the Mortal Kombat Taz really suits it. The track artwork reveals that the song was created by Butt-Nast Albatross, which is just another fracture in the artist names that Digi uses. The album itself is supposedly created by Arts of Artso, but I wouldn't read too much into it. The song starts with Digi not caring about whether or not she is accessible, but she also feels a strong distaste towards people who are ignorant. Digi goes on to tell people to welcome strangeness. Then the song completely pivots to Digi talking about how she wants her children to grow up more educated and intelligent than the sort of people who express the sort of ignorance that she detests. After that, the song mostly becomes about different forms of machismo posturing until the end. However, at the end of the song, she expresses empathy towards people who have felt the same sort of alienation and displacement as she does. Overall, it has a good place on the album, but it's also relatively abstract, and reading into it more would probably not give much more understanding in what it fundamentally means beyond all the layers of abstraction. Mindwash basically doesn't have lyrics. I'm pretty sure it's just meant to be a noisy palate cleanser, but the next song is the most complete and significant of everything on the album in my opinion. This is Fuck Away. The video album just has it set to various warped and noisy scenes from Evangelion. The track image looks like some highlighted Japanese art. So let's analyze the song. The song can be divided into two parts. The first half has singing and lyrics, spliced with audio from anime. This creates a sense of stylistic completion when it comes to the overall discography of Trial. It's as experimental as anything Trial has made, but retains the anime aesthetic that permeates the discography. The second half of Fuck Away is just a droning instrumental. On its own, this is just a relatively hypnotizing melody that shines the most in the context of the album. Now for the lyrics. The first verse opens with Digi rejecting the entirety of the world. The world doesn't like her, and she doesn't like the world. Despite taking an aggressive stance, she doesn't portray an active role in this process. As long as the world keeps rejecting her, the only choice she has is to reject the world back. The next verse asserts that even though Digi is superior to most people, she's still subject to human flaws. Although I can't clearly make out most of this verse, so my interpretation has to end here, although I do feel like I captured the essence of what it's supposed to mean. Digi continues and says that she has found a place for her in the world, and now wants nothing other than to not be impeded upon by the world that has already rejected her. Understanding the final verse is similarly impeded by how unclear the lyrics are. However, it seems like it has a deeply personal meaning. It probably expresses the conflict between wanting to maintain her personal life while also having a desire to change the culture that surrounds her. Overall, sound-wise, it brings the song to a close. Future me interrupting yet again. The previous paragraphs were valuable enough to not be removed, but we now have the full lyrics to Fuck Away via the old school underground re-mixtape. And I was basically right. So, with the middle verses, I think my interpretation was pretty spot on. Digi fails as much as the rest of us, but that doesn't excuse the flaws that anyone else has. She's found her home, and her home makes her less capable of fighting others, but more willing to. The final verse is packed full of various references, and it's less conflicted than I thought it was. It's a very aggressive march against every establishment, from governments and financial systems to cultural norms. Digi wants to create a new world with the people who are ready for it, but is completely fine with letting other people stay in the hell they have created for themselves. Overall, this closes out the sentiment expressed in earlier work and leads to the manifesto that is the world over. After Fuck Away has lulled the listener into a passive state, the album quickly interrupts with Suffer Me, a screeching jump scare of a track. It's not even really a song, although it clearly has lyrics, which I'm simply unable to make out. It's clearly a song made to startle the audience, and I'm sure the lyrics would add on to the theme if I could understand what they were. The video attached to this makes it only more startling, and the album art conveys something that looks like a pathetic but vaguely demonic creature. The album continues with what I would consider to be the actual final track, in Swamp Scream. It's another drony track with the video being set in a forest, and the album art being similarly dark and eerie. As with many other tracks, I can't even begin to analyze the lyrics because I can't understand anything being said. And here we come to the final track in Pinnacle. It's pretty much redundant after the album, but a solid enough song to zone out and calm down with. The art associated with it just enhances this perspective. It drags the album down a bit, but it does help the listener get out of the intense mood the album sets. It should be half as long as it is too. As it currently is, it overstays its welcome and is pretty redundant when we consider the latter half of Fuck Away as a similar piece with better execution. Overall, the Unknown Tape is not my favourite album. A lot of the experimentation is very hit or miss, and I'm personally not a fan of making something experimental for the sake of making it weird. Furthermore, the album is brought down greatly by there being no available lyrics, and the songs themselves being incredibly distorted, and the words being hard to make out. I'm sure I would enjoy the album more if I had lyrics to it, but listening to it enough has made it possible to make out enough words to properly enjoy it at all. I think everyone who likes the rest of Trial could click with the Unknown Tape. I think a lot of people who don't like the somewhat less personal albums might like the tape just because it's so personal. But as Digi herself has stated, the album is just herself at full blast. The listening experience is supposed to somewhat convey how difficult it is to deal with her, and more importantly, deal with being her. So it doesn't need to be accessible, that's its fundamental charm. It's difficult, esoteric, and incredibly unfriendly. Although I think that the lens Digi went to reinforce this was excessive. Knowing the song titles without having to solve a puzzle and being able to read the lyrics could have enhanced the experience. They might have also led to more discussion and analysis about the album itself. However, those artistic choices have been made and they're most likely not going to change. Furthermore, there's likely never going to be anything quite like the tape. The more recent stuff Trial has put out is more accessible and takes from a wide variety of styles instead of trying to innovate where there's no need to necessarily create something new. It seems like Trial has returned to a sound that's more informed by what's pleasant to listen to and less just an experiment to make something that feels special. But before we move on, we should close out the main story of this book. This is the story of Digi and me, listening to music that she made. Trial of the Unknown Tape. So over time, I came to appreciate the Unknown Tape. This was the last big challenge I had after submerging myself in this music for months. Although I'm writing this section way after I was absolutely obsessed with all of these albums, I still listen to most of them on a consistent basis. I have returned to listening to things I would more usually listen to, whether it's various forms of punk rock, other hip-hop acts, or something completely different altogether. I still like every Trial album, and the way I connect with them is unmatched by anything else, but there's a limited amount of hours you can spend listening to the same album over and over again. Throwing on the tape has become something I do every 2 weeks or so, and the rest of the albums play whenever the mood strikes, which tends to be around the same frequency. Even though I can't really claim to be as invested as I once was, I'm sure that whenever a new album comes out, I'll probably buy it and listen to it until it wears out. When it comes to the story of Digi, I think Done on Tape is a relatively decent closer for this era. It presents an honest look into someone incredibly conflicted and completely uncertain about where she should take her life and whether anything she cares about can actually ground her in reality. It's both manic and depressive at the same time, and a natural culmination of everything set out in previous projects. We can trace various parts of the album back to the history of Trial, and we can look at everything in a broader context. But I've already reflected enough on the tape, and don't really have any more energy to immerse myself in its depths. I hope the connections that I've made here help anyone reading fit the piece into the larger puzzle of Trial. Overall, the albums have their own specific appeal, and it's not an appeal that normal people who like normal music can appreciate. You have to either be completely open to listening to something so outsider that it loses track of anything other than its own intentions, or you have to not care about music to the extent that you can't tell whether or not something abandons everything that usually makes music good. These albums are not made for anyone who doesn't like them, and if you happen to listen to them, it just means that you have been blessed by an outside force that would otherwise have never cared about you. They're out there for anyone to explore, but they weren't made for you if you dislike them. They weren't really made for people like me who like them either. Trial exists so that Digi can make the album she wants to make, and anyone who enjoys them is invited to appreciate them. The part where I took a break for like 3 months. Everything before this section was roughly written in November 2019 to December 2019, exception being the Trial of the Unknown Tape chapter that was written in late January or something. It's now March 2020 and I'm finally editing this book. I was always on the fence about whether to go beyond the Unknown Tape, but now I'm sure that I want to. So there's going to be an entirely tonally dissonant section that doesn't really match the first part of this book. I've changed as a person in 3 months. Not substantially, but a lot has happened. I'm not completely obsessed with Trial anymore, probably for the better. I still really like all the albums though, and there's absolutely nothing insincere about anything stated at any point in this book. The music did change my life in multiple ways, and the journey I was on was fantastic. You just sometimes gotta listen to something different for a change. Anyway, Digi went and released the RE-MXTapes, and I'm actually passionate about this project again. Almost like having new music to listen to makes me want to think about the old stuff again. And I have been listening to all the old stuff again, so this is why the next sections will be different. Also, I haven't gone through with it yet, but I'm pretty sure my world over analysis will suck major ass, and I'll write it in one go and waste it out of my mind. Gonna be lit. 10 gallons of fuck. I never thought I would get into 10 gallons, so I honestly didn't even consider analysing it in any way. However, it happened, and I gave the album more listens than I previously had, and I like it a lot. I thought it was just okay before, and didn't really look farther into it than just White Kanye West and Everything is Devilman, which are obviously the standout tracks. But the rest of the album is pretty good too. This excluding tracks 7 to 9, of which one is just a weird cover, and the other 2 are instrumental songs that don't really appeal to me in any way. White Kanye West is incredibly specific, yet intentionally vague at the same time. It's a form of aggression that Digi obviously aimed at a specific group of people, but anyone could direct towards whoever they're currently angry at. When some community of people are fucking with you, fuck them. When someone is being a hypocrite, they're a punk bitch motherfucker. The song itself is mostly about people with absolutely no ground to stand on, trying to grandstand Digi. They don't actually believe in what they're saying, and they haven't even thought it through. But they still use their moralistic instincts to tell Digi what she should do. And if she doesn't listen, they're willing to intentionally create problems so that they could act out their knee-jerks. The song is also about people who don't even try to understand Digi, criticizing her for them not understanding her. She doesn't need to cater to people if she's already doing her best to give a view into her life from the least distance she could. So she doesn't care about what people say. She's already self-critical enough. And I think this is the part where you have to get into the meta-commentary inherent in 10 gallons. This album seems incohesive on the surface, but the tracks offer great commentaries on how Digi sees her own music career. In this song, she properly reconciles the overarching theme of hating criticism from others while being incredibly self-doubting at times. Whenever someone criticizes her, they're ignoring the fact that Digi already criticized herself on that basis before, on top of probably missing the point and giving her half-formed critique. Overall, no one needs to like her or accept her. They're not her target audience, and trying to somehow become it is just erroneous. The album goes on with Everything is Devilman. This song is very chaotic, and so properly trying to dissect it is incredibly hard. My best guess is that the development mentioned in the song are people who can live independent lives without having to take any specific sides. From the most obvious standpoint, the song is about people who can be independent and creative and don't have to rely on either God or the government. The song is also about how everyone should strive to be their best and never compromise to the people who want to drag them down. Anyway, the song is a massive banger, and trying to read too much deeper into a minute of complete chaos would be compromising on my own creative vision. There are a bunch of connections I could still make. I don't think that degree of over-analysis is fitting for the song. Hackin seems to resemble Care than God, since Digi once again puts herself into a divine position, this time as a no shit God. And it's another call for people to create a new world where everyone could authentically be themselves instead of having to worry about the forces of the status quo. The time to create something new is limited, and it has to be done as soon as possible. The tiniest piece is the most defining part of making everything in Trial make a lot more sense. It inherently addresses the duality in all of the songs. Here, she separates her into two distinct people. One is the person who preaches empathy, the other is the person who lashes out, and then there's the true Digi that only her fiancé ever gets to see. So fundamentally, the contradiction I have been pointing out throughout the entire book is completely cleared up. Digi herself functions as a duality. Sometimes she just is the hurt person who hates everyone, and sometimes she's the person who can have fun and feel empathy. And then somewhere deep behind everything else, she experiences both at the same time. That person is way too removed from us to ever be truly seen. The album continues with Till I Can't No More, which is a part of the entire running album theme, and just about running until she can't no more. It probably has a deeper meaning they can't reach due to not understanding the main lyrics well enough to analyze them. This theme continues with Run With That Shit, a song most about accepting the things that hurt, and moving on with the knowledge that pain is inherent in making progress. Digi encourages people to do the cool shit they want to do just for the sake of themselves, and only rely on themselves to get it done. And even when they're broken people who can't imagine ever really succeeding, that's what they have to do to unbreak themselves. And even though it's hard, and doesn't necessarily give you any immediate pleasure, if you choose to stop trying to do anything good, there's no real point in anything because you're already basically dead. The song then goes on to talk about how Digi became completely obsessed with her creative career and became completely detached from her personal life, once again invoking the boat at sea analogy she often used during that time period. But she's moved on and is now comfortable with the people she can connect to, and is working on becoming stronger from all the suffering she went through. Then the album takes a nosedive that I won't even touch upon, but after that is finished, it moves on to I'll Be Ready Now. I don't feel comfortable interpreting it. The only lyric it has is just, I think I'll be ready now when people start dying on me. Think of that what you will. The World Over. Consider this section of the book as something of a hacked-together DLC. It was never supposed to be here, it wasn't really a part of the original plan. I just wanted to tell a specific story, and this is just tacked onto it, so you could get the full experience with the bits that were originally missing from the project. So it's only an improvement on the baseline, not a contribution to what already exists. It fleshes out the canon, but doesn't add anything to it. Feel free to skip this entire chapter if you already have at least a surface level understanding of The World Over. I'm saying all of this because the actual analysis to The World Over should be left to anybody but me. The only strength that my own perspective has is that I have a similar thought process to Digi, and I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. And not from a superficial standpoint, but a direct stream where her songs are linked to my most primal feelings. And even though this isn't really a self-congratulatory piece, I feel like I can add something most people can't. Well, when it comes to this album, there's not much unique I can add. From a standpoint of the sound, I heavily prefer the remixes to the original when it comes to the songs here. I still really like the lyrics, but the album way underperforms due to having to be structured around an anime soundtrack that doesn't really give it another dimension. I don't feel like the lyrics get enhanced by the instrumentals, nor do I think the raps enhance the soundtrack. So at the end, we're met with a lot of abstract philosophy connected to a narrative about the internet culture and the soundtrack to an anime. All of the elements independently could create something great, but combined, they result in a project that makes too much sense and becomes somewhat boring because of it. It could be fantastic, but just lacks another dimension to pull everything together in a very satisfying way. I understand the creative intent, and the idea that it's a cyberpunk view that connects reality to something fictitious and makes up for it by bridging it with a narrative where online reality is transplanted into a fictitious world, but doesn't provide the same type of satisfying experience it could, because it sacrifices listenability to trying to reach a conceptual goal that's far out of the reach of any real album. Maybe someone who is really used to listening to prog or something like that could fully appreciate it and connect all the pieces. That's not me. With that being said, I still want to talk about the album and go over what I think are the most important parts of every song. So let's begin at the start of the story. First of all, the album is about the person running a radio station 66.6 who's trying to bring a specific message to people listening to it. It tells a specific story set in a world that reifies the internet. It aggressively puts the role of the internet in everyone's lives into perspective. The internet is not just something that accentuates lives. It's an inherent part of where everyone lives. It has very defined residents who spend their lives in it and depend on it to survive. To start with, we begin the story with Cyber Slum Overture. The song begins with setting the scene for the audience, and then transitions into talking about how the entire planet, and by extension the internet, has degraded over time. The main character resides in the place with the best art. However, most people just don't care to make anything good. The only thing they want is to peacefully do nothing for their entire life. Even if peace means sacrificing all their agency to follow the trends set out for them by people beyond their own influence. So since they can't be at peace when they have agency, they're not going to ever even attempt to properly think for themselves. But the people who promise them any degree of order are actively hostile actors who just want to capitalize on their existence without ever really caring about what they personally might want from their own lives. So instead of trying to pursue something bigger, they just meld back into general society at large. Their conformity will inevitably lead to the entire world being taken over by the people who don't want anything other than to destroy dissenting perspectives, which are the only things worthwhile in the world anyway. And the only way to ever become a real person is to cut off all contact that you might have with the process that will inevitably doom you to be a part of the extinction of anything that might have been good. So the process goes on, and everything will become sanitized, and there will only be less and less room for actually good shit in the world. So everyone is bound to die, while they have only played into a process that diminished everything valuable that their lives might have had. But you can rise up and try to carve out your own peace in the world. You can make friends who are willing to back you up while you pursue the ability to make real art. And you can keep going and you can keep being yourself, even when that's the hardest thing you could possibly ever do. So even though everyone is completely satisfied being part of a system that only really strives to extinguish anything good about humanity, you can choose to only ever be a part of the section of the world that tries to make life worthwhile. The album then goes on with Genuflect, which continues the story of the establishment trying to extinguish all hope of creating a better world. Why should you even try when what really matters is just living your own life, and everything is already way beyond repair? And every part of the informational network that informs people of world events is under the control of a unified narrative. Any opinion that descends too far from what's accepted as a part of reality will never be endorsed by any of the architecture responsible for bringing information to the masses. And if you ever trust any section of the media, you will not even be able to think, and you're only going to be able to worship the companies whose entire purpose is to warp your reality. And now nothing is worth fighting for, because the entire notion of reality and progress is at the whims of a greater narrative. You can't do anything other than just present yourself as a madman for dissenting from what is commonly accepted to be true, and take the ensuing hostility that you're inevitably bound to face. The only way to be truly successful is to build a massive brand that puts yourself into the same community that the narrative would force you to be in. And to do that, you have to eject everyone who still has the strength to resist it from your life, to not see him as if you have strayed too far from what is commonly accepted. Aura Borea is one of the more esoteric songs. It's a narrative about a girl who is being tortured for speaking the truth, and tells us that the motivation of the main character is to make people realize what the message of the girl is. Overall, I can't really analyze it beyond what it literally is, which is just an exaggerated call for people to listen to what the message is, under the pretense that people are suffering to bring it to them. Tetragrammaton Labyrinth is a song about how to fit in, and how the entire world is trying to force people to accept its inherent contradictions. And you shouldn't trust anyone who presents themselves as an authority, and you shouldn't even trust the messages conveyed in the album without thinking for yourself. It's not just that the authority is overtly hostile, It also warps the entire way you think about the world and forces you how to learn to conform to it. You have to learn how to be a part of the society that accepts the premises laid out to them. And to do that, you have to fundamentally alter how you act. And even after going through all of that effort, you're still eventually stuck either representing every part of yourself or being at risk of being cast out of society at the slightest deviation from it. So no matter how hard you try to bring your message to them, you're always bound to fail. People actively resist thinking about things outside the framework of what they think is possible, even though they have been convinced to only think in terms of a very small subsection of things that could happen. And the only way to change that is becoming aware that there are options far beyond what the central tenets of society would want them to think. But eventually, if things get bad enough, it's possible to realize that no matter what people should think, life has endless options. The author starts with talking about how the fact that it's hard to connect with people will inherently cause conversations to break down. The song goes on to talk about how you should feel empathy towards other people, and if you want to connect with them, you have to put in the work. It then brings out the example of your own parents and how hard it is to see how much they themselves have had to bear the weight of the world. And if you want to truly understand someone, you have to understand the things that they have been through, because people generally want to connect with others, even if they have put up various mental walls that have rendered them unable to really do so. Working through all of that will take time and patience, and you just have to be willing to go through with all of it. Talk That Nothing to me is about sex and drugs, and everything is a metaphor. I think the song might be about having sex with an underage prostitute while being incredibly cross-faded. So I'm not very sure, and I won't put too much thought into it, because I can't really divine any significant meaning from it. Mortal Contact goes on to criticize the force inherent in the way people are conditioned to be a part of normal society. If you have dissenting ideas, you have to protect them by fighting back against all forces that are trying to bring you down. And since you lack the force to even compete with the degree of power you're faced with, you can only live in the contradictions and hope that your own protests don't get snuffed out from existence. And you have to work to be able to live as yourself, even if that results in not making any progress in the sense of moving up in conventional society. So to even accomplish that, you have to abandon any hope of ever living a real life. To top it all off, the fact that things are how they are is not even your fault. All the institutions that currently exist have done everything they can to stop you from succeeding. And even if you do succeed outside of the established framework, you're stuck with having to work hard and being unable to accomplish anything that would lead to more universalized independence. And even people who are up to the task are dealing with having everyone around them charge the validity of their existence. And at that point, the only thing you can do is help them and let them help you, and try to figure out where you can go with your life next. Because ultimately, your own success depends on yourself, even if you need other people to accomplish it. Bite for It goes on to say that most people don't care if their lives are worth anything. They don't try to explore all the possibilities that come with life. They don't try to improve themselves. This is especially considering that even though individuals have endless possibilities, the world itself isn't that big. But people have been made to think that they're powerless, so they just let the world itself dictate how they're going to live. Ready for War is an entire screed, and also in my opinion the second best song off the album from a standpoint of what sounds the best musically. It puts everything previously said in the album into one song that declares war on every tendency digi already called out previously. Make good art, be yourself, and don't let anyone hold you down. This world is full of fuck starts by stating that there's no real difference between being outwardly intelligent or drawn into your own obsessions. It goes on to then state that most people just need to obtain status and reinforce the world they live in. Even if they want to change the world, they don't want to go outside the accepted ideas of how change could possibly happen. But if you still function within a framework where you don't have any power, the way you change the world will not fundamentally alter your own ability to make things better. And it doesn't seem like there's any real way to force people to see things outside of the perspective they've been conditioned into. So the only thing left to do is try your hardest to show the absurdities inherent within existing power structures. Osmotic Offering is another song about how people alter their language and being to conform to the expectations upon them. And once you stray from the conformity, the alternative isn't that much better. You just keep seeing the raw nature of how things are, and it keeps getting more exhausting the longer you bear it. The only thing left to want is a calm life, with someone who cares about you, and is willing to put in the effort to please you. But to get that calm life, you have to return to the structures of power and become a part of the process again. Kimochi Warui ends the album proper with describing how the connections described in the previous song were formed. It also concludes a less subtextual and more overt narrative of the album, which I guess we should at least glance over now. As you know, this book is here to talk about the story of Digi, since that's what I'm interested in. But this album itself had a narrative. And as stated before at the start, I'm not used to listening to albums with a narrative, so I can barely understand it. The main gist of it is that there's a conflict between the main radio host and the various political forces in the world they live in, and by Kimochi Warui, the osmotic offering has been accepted and the main character has become a godlike entity via creating a hive mind, but they lost the ability to truly be themselves. At least that's what I think, I'm not really sure. Anyway, if this interpretation is correct, creating the hive mind and finding human connections that deep has overridden everything that they previously used to value. This probably is inspired by NGE or something, and really needs to be analysed by someone who has more context. Anyway, the song doesn't really provide that much in regards of the narrative that I actually can understand and talk about. It touches on the color metaphor that Digi also used in 7.4 billion. There's no more passion, since she's completely satisfied with just existing in a satisfied state. But I'm completely out of my depth, so I'm going to move on. The album ends with Seafarer's Requiem, which is my personal favourite. The song is about how even when you escape the false reality, there's still always a temptation to go back in there. But it concludes by seeing the person still stuck in their version of reality, struggling as much as you forgot you did. The song probably also connects back to the overarching narrative, which, as stated before, I don't sufficiently understand to comment much on. So that was the world over. I don't know if I had anything relevant at all to say about the album, but I hope I did. The book still goes on though, and I feel like I have much more worthwhile analysis on the rest of the albums that are coming up. I really just wrote this part to have written everything I possibly could. Tisn't It Chief? Tisn't It Chief is underrated as fuck, even by Digi, because she thought that these projects are bad because she never went through with the original ideas she had. 7.4 billion and On That Ragnarok shit are the standouts, and I'm glad they got adapted into the RE-MXTapes. When Will They Build the World I Wanna Live In is also really good, and I hope that if Digi makes another RE-MXTape, she'll make a cover of that song in a new style. First of all, I won't cover Rainy Lenny, Shintara Keiga Rap, Listen Homie, and Twisted Transistor. The first three are only relevant to their specific projects, and the last one is a cover. They're all decent experiments in their own respective projects, but since they don't really tie into anything else, there's not really that much of a point in discussing them. Before getting into the project, I have to mention how well the album is set. Rainy Len is the perfect intro, and 7.4 billion flows perfectly into Twisted Transistor, which in turn is perfect to listen to before On That Ragnarok shit. After that, the album transitions into a more creepy cute tone, and there's a second intro in Listen Homie, followed by Shintaro Keiga Rap, which seamlessly leads up to Blackout Curtains, and then dives back into the original mood with When Will They Build the World I Wanna Live In to conclude the album. It's structured very well. So for 7.4 billion, it begins with expressing that everyone should think for themselves and persevere. Then it follows that up by being a direct response to the early work of Trial, by saying that the reason people are alienated is not because they're somehow wrong, but because the society that they are a part of does not accept them. It continues with a passionate individualism, where any commonalities and tribal affiliations are just made up. In reality, the world just consists of every person and their individual perspectives, which refers back to the title, as there are 7.4 billion different perspectives on life, and they all need to be accounted for. The song then goes on to talk about colors, and at this point everything is my interpretation, but it dovetails too well with Digi's story to discount. She talks about how she spent her time depressed until she finally developed a real passion for her art. And after she had felt that, she fell in love, introducing an entirely new set of problems to her life. But throughout all of this process, she gets more alienated. Then she goes back to talk about the era after she had experienced her first major setback that coincides with Gay and Dead. Her dreams might have been crushed then, but that experience overall made her into a far stronger person. But that doesn't make up for how much she still can't stand having to put up with the demands of society, and how much she can't stand having to live inside herself. She then goes on to critique society for inspiring constant conflict that will not end in her lifetime. People are never going to make sense, and even if they will at some point, that's going to be laughably far in the future. Change is possible, but it will take a very long time. Furthermore, the best art will not be appreciated by the general public, no matter how great it is. So, everyone has to participate in societal conflict to a degree, but they will not come out of it unscathed, all of which is incredibly dumb. And even though there are people with a lot of potential, they will abandon it because they want to be a part of the ordinary. And since the vast majority of people are ordinary, the ones with real talent will never really live up to their potential in the face of overwhelming pressure. The first verse of On the Ragnarok Shit deals with how everyone is incentivized to have the most extreme position possible and be as loud as possible about it. No one can have a tame, nuanced viewpoint on anything, since the only thing that matters is furthering your allegiance. Nothing has to make sense, as long as it can get through to people. So antagonism and nonsensical views are promoted if they have the greatest reach. This is contrasted with the world around everyone crumbling. There's no hope for creating a better future, so people just default to trying to institute the victory of the people who they want to represent themselves in. But in reality, there is no such representation. People are being convinced that they are being represented based on frivolous commonalities without a greater depth of understanding. So the end result is just a complete division without any real rational purpose. The second verse deals with the results of the division. Progress has halted, and hope in a complete restructuring of society has been lost. No one can expect things to get better anymore, but Digi won't stop fighting, no matter how bad everything seems to get. The world is important to her, and she will only give up hope when there's nothing else left to do. Blackout Curtains is a very relatable song, which makes sense given that it's from 2017, where Digi was living a lifestyle that's similar to one that I have lived. When I lived on the first floor of a building, I never wanted anyone to be able to see inside, so I was forced to have the blinds on throughout the entire day. So I didn't necessarily even intend to black out the curtains, but it happened that way. Then I lost all sense of time, everything blended together. The only time when I could open up the blinds on a normal day was night time, because no one was on the outside looking in back then. I don't know why I cared so much either. It's probably because I spent most of my time basically naked, until I froze myself in the winter. Yet I still kept the curtains up. I guess I just didn't want to be seen. Anyway, the song is about how Digi feels much more comfortable in her isolation, and how she knows that she can connect with others, and wishes she got paid for doing so. The themes present here are the same ones expressed in K and Dead, so there's not really any point in analysing the song itself too much. It's just Digi being Digi. And finally, When Will They Build the World I Wanna Live In is very self-explanatory. Digi is unhappy with the world, and she wants a better one where she can live a normal human life without having to put up with everyone else. It's definitely one of the catchiest trial songs, but that's not really saying much, considering that most songs try to avoid being catchy as well as they possibly can. How I distract myself. This was the last album I really listened to. I had already become at least somewhat acquainted with the rest of the discography, but it seems that Digi intentionally buried this one. It is just experimental self-production, but it shouldn't have been promoted the way it was. The album cover is more reminiscent of older improv projects, and overall it doesn't have the feel of a real album. But despite all that, it's very decent. It follows up on Ghosts and Unknown Tape very well, while still managing to be its own thing. It's a very solid project in a lineup where I'm more familiar with every other piece of work. But it's almost like DJ really didn't want anyone to listen to it. It might be because the album itself mostly got released to clean up the releases from SoundCloud, making it somewhat of a follow-up to SoundCloud Rescues, except it has more than one great exclusive song. If you haven't before, go listen to Ghost Tribe from SoundCloud Rescues. A part of the way I feel towards this album might be because it was the last one I listened to when I had already run out of everything else. So it's not really the most objective take or anything. However, if you have already listened to the great albums a bunch, How I Distract Myself will not be a disappointing experience. Especially because it touches on a time period where Digi wasn't really making any other music, and comes close to following up Bedrock and Ghosts to be the third really great personal album. Numbers is a logical conclusion to every song where Digi talks about people who aren't willing to support her. She stopped having any reason to defend herself once she could prove that the method she has taken for her art has worked for her and no one can really criticize her. Her method obviously works, even if it inherently alienates people, but she achieved the results that she wanted to accomplish. This song also is a part of her being on the Dick Show, since being able to be a part of something she's a fan of validates the decisions she has made over time. It's not like she wants people to like her. She doesn't care about whether or not she's liked, as long as what she's doing is working. She can be as unacceptable as she wants to be, and she has the numbers to back it up. All she really needs is herself and the support of the people who understand her, and that's enough. This is nothing new, but it's a vital part to understand the wider paradigm that has been expressed through these songs. If the Unknown tape wasn't explicit enough, Digi is done with conforming to how people see her. She's just going to do what she wants to do, and she doesn't need to do anything other than that. Biting Cold is a song uniquely about being stuck in Boston in the winter, surrounded by a hostile environment, in a home that Digi doesn't even want to be in. She doesn't like the harsh winters, and just wants to go back to the warm climate back in Virginia Beach. Even though moving had an upside, she's now stuck somewhere she really doesn't want to be in. There's restrictive snow everywhere, and she doesn't want to be in this climate. There's no way to have freedom and progress when stuck in a frozen landscape that's not better than the suburban wasteland that she's used to. This theme continues in Snow Halation. It's another song about how depressive it is to be stuck in the snow. Even though she has her life figured out, the place she's living is still as bad as it ever was. It's still hell to be in an environment while the world at large is inhospitable. Digi needs to go somewhere else and create a life much more stable than where she is stuck at the moment, where every decision she makes is directed by the snow. The song is also about how Digi does not only feel stuck in her environment, but she's also stuck creatively. She can't keep innovating, and she can't keep moving forward. She can try to make some progress, but it's not panning out the way she wanted it to. She has to find a way to reignite the passion she had towards creating cool shit. Y'all don't make no fucking sense. It's just about how much Digi likes good art, and how much she hates the conventional normalcy that everyone willingly surrounds themselves by. The general public has bad taste, and Digi can't understand how they can live with themselves, knowing that their preferences are just bad, and they don't even try to improve their thought processes to make up for it. Bread and Butter talks about how people are fine with conformity as long as it gives them material benefits. None of that should matter as long as people can function based on their own principles and live their own life according to what they want to do. And they don't need to conform to be an important part of general culture. However, if you want to have the endorsement of the establishment, you need to cater to it. The lyrics in Sleep Never Came are too abstracted to fully understand. I'm pretty sure it's about rejecting nihilistic views, even though nihilism makes sense. Invalid Litter Department has a really great beat, but I can't really divine any meaning out of it either. It's probably way too esoteric for anyone other than Digi to really explain it. And finally, we get to God on Man's Road, a song about idealizing something that no one can aspire to. Everyone could accomplish feats only really plausible within the realm of fiction, but fiction is that for a reason. There's no real way to hold yourself to the standards of someone who was never meant to be realistic, and only serves as something to aspire to, where people too stubborn to acknowledge that they themselves function as a barrier that limits what they can possibly ever accomplish. But you can go as far as you want as long as you know how to. Nothing is stopping you other than your own limits. And once you understand them, you have positioned yourself in a place where no one could ever possibly expect to live up to the standards you have set. Not because you're inherently special, but because you have acquainted yourself perfectly to your own internal workings. And even if you're just one part of a larger picture, you're important because no one else is anything like yourself. At the end of the day, you're the only person who can be yourself, and no matter what someone else might try, it's impossible to beat being yourself. So even if there's nothing else redeeming about you as a person, being true to yourself can't be beat. Learn to love to hate yourself. Learn to Love to Hate Yourself is a collection of tracks previously released on SoundCloud. It should have really included On the Wrong Side, since that song perfectly fits with the tone of the album. Maybe that glaring omission will be a part of a future project, but currently feels like a giant missed opportunity. Learn to Love is already a good project, but On the Wrong Side is superior to everything in it, so it might make sense to release it in a future project of similar quality. On the surface, Learn to Love is similar to 10 Gallons of Fuck, except it's actually listenable and doesn't violently assault anyone trying to get into it for the first time. Especially like a crest from an experimental standpoint. The really calm beat interlaced with distorted screaming vocals makes for a very unique effect. I'm not even going to try to decipher it though. The album also features a lot of singing, which I'm personally a big fan of. Even though rap is a medium with its own advantages, Digi sings very well. Out of It describes a very unique type of detachment where nothing is inherently bad, but existing is uncomfortable. There's no way to halt the progress of time, there's no easy way to rectify the inherent problems in your life. So you just keep existing and trying to figure out where to go next, and none of the options presented to you are obvious. It all just comes down to something you can't quite grasp, at least not yet. When you make a mistake, it feels permanent. It's not something passing, it keeps haunting you because you can't think of anything other than the way the time stretches everything around you. But it's not depressive, you're still functional and you can do everything essential to your life. And when the mood strikes, you can do something incredibly cool. But creativity isn't a given. It only comes when something inside you clicks and you stop wasting time. The only thing you really feel is a survival instinct that lets you get through everything. Nothing will survive is self-explanatory once you can start making out the lyrics. It's just Digi singing about how she doesn't want to cater to the people who don't even care about her. But after this song, the album transitions to a far more aggressive sound with cold shit, and the previous song leads up to it perfectly by encapsulating both the themes of alienation in society and confidence in your own music. Cold Shit starts off as being about the fundamental inability to express precisely the art that you want to make. Whenever you have to actually execute something, it degrades by being connected to a physical medium instead of just existing as a concept. And in that process of translation, the inherent part that makes it personal has to undergo the evaluation of other people. And because that part is already alienated from what you actually feel, people aren't judging your concept, but the way you manage to execute it, which almost always is worse than what you were thinking about. The song then goes on to talk about how Digi is still feeling like she's constantly degrading, and how she really just wants to get drunk or high, and how she shamelessly takes inspiration from whatever she thinks is good. Though the Caldera takes the entire aggressive sound up an entire level, it's probably a misanthropic call to make Yellowstone explode and take out half the country. And finally, the album concludes with a crest and brings everything to a satisfying conclusion. Old School Underground RE-MXTP and Nujabro. So, did she release these albums in a week? They're both remixes of her best songs or beats that she wouldn't usually use. The first remix has a ton of character, while the second one flows incredibly well. Since it's all recycled material, there's no real use analysing it all. I would say that around half the songs on both projects are improved from an emotional sense, and almost all of the tracks have vocals that are superior to the original ones. They're very good and you should check them out.